Chapter 202. Go to watch net. As the saying goes, when a person is unlucky, even cold water will get stuck. Li Yundong felt that he was feeling a little bit like this now. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at the furious and jealous Yanhua and said, "She and I are just ordinary friends. Go to watch net." 7 KOM. After saying that, he felt that it was inappropriate. What ordinary friends? This stinky girl also hurt a girl, and I haven't settled the score with her yet. I just didn't make trouble for her for Ziyuan's sake. Li Yundong said again, "Well, we're not ordinary friends." It would have been better if Li Yundong hadn't said this, but as soon as he said it, there was a suspicion that he had confessed. Yanhua snorted and sneered, "So it seems that you are very close friends?" Seeing this guy pestering him like a mad dog, Li Yundong couldn't help but feel angry in his heart, but he didn't want to cause trouble. He had killed young Master He with a bolt of lightning, and the heavenly tribulation hadn't passed yet. At this time it was really not good to cause trouble. Li Yundong couldn't help but say angrily to Ruan Hongling, "Hey, what are you doing? Don't cause trouble for me." Yanhua suddenly became furious. He rushed over and pushed Li Yundong with both hands, shouting, "Are you a man or not? Why are you angry at a girl? If you have the guts, come at me." Seeing him make a move, Li Yundong snorted coldly and waved his hand. Yanhua's whole body suddenly flew up like a kite. Everyone saw Li Yundong raise his arm, and without much force, Yanhua flew more than a meter high and 4 or 5 meters away. As soon as Ruan Hongling saw Yanhua fly up, she was also afraid that Li Yundong would cause trouble, so she jumped over. Her figure was elegant and graceful, and her clothes fluttered in the wind as she caught Yanhua. As the saying goes, the layman watches the fun, while the expert knows the ropes. These students only felt that Ruan Hongling was agile and light. With a flash of her figure, she had already pressed down on Yanhua's shoulder and stood 4 or 5 meters away, just like a hidden martial arts master. They suddenly cheered loudly one by one. Some of them were so excited that their eyes were shining. Some of them even had the titles of the posts at the top of the gossip section of the school forum. Beautiful freshman versus legend? Is the beautiful girl stronger, or Li Yundong is stronger? Extra, Li Yundong's mysterious lover emerges. For the unforgettable love, he gave up the call of a famous school to follow the footsteps of love. Beauty, top scholar, legend, that unspeakable love triangle. Watch net. These laymen were all here to watch a good show. Some of them even shouted excitedly, "Fight! Go and fight!" However, Li Yundong could tell from Ruan Hongling's elegant figure that she had a solid basic skills. Moreover, when she took on Yanhua, she did it with ease. She did have the demeanor of a disciple of a famous family. He was secretly praising her in his heart, but what Ruan Hongling said next almost made his nose crooked. After Ruan Hongling caught Yanhua, she patted him on the shoulder and said, "Are you crazy? Why did you fight with him? Are you his match?" Yanhua's face turned purple and he said, "A gentleman uses his mouth, not his fists." Some of the students nearby looked disdainful. "Humph, it seems that you were the first one to fight just now." Ruan Hongling had fought with Li Yundong before, and both times she had been completely defeated. Later they had quarreled, but she hadn't gained any advantage with her mouth. Every time she thought of this, she gnashed her teeth with hatred. Hearing Yanhua's words, Ruan Hongling sneered and said, "If you can beat him with your mouth, I'll give up. You're good." Yanhua was overjoyed when he heard this. "Really?" After that, he puffed out his chest and said to Li Yundong arrogantly, "Li Yundong, do you dare to debate with me?" When Yanhua was in high school, he had represented the school in the national debate competition and won the title of the best debater. He was extremely good at talking. Moreover, he had read all kinds of books since he was a child, so he had a lot of knowledge. He was very conceited about his debating skills and looked down on this student from a third-rate university. However, Li Yundong was a person who disdained to talk with others. If he met someone like Wu Hao who tried to kill him and steal his treasures, he would immediately kill him and his soul without saying a word. He had even attracted the punishment of heavenly thunder to young Master He and destroyed the body and soul of the high-ranking official. It could be said that he was cruel and merciless. How could he be disdainful to argue with Yanhua? Li Yundong ignored Yanhua and just glared at Ruan Hongling. In his opinion, this girl was purely looking for trouble. She knew that he wanted to cultivate quietly, but she still made trouble for him. It was simply hateful. "Ruan Hongling?" Li Yundong shouted angrily, "Are you asking for a beating again? Why are you fanning the flames for no reason?" He spoke unintentionally, but the others were listening attentively. "Hey, why again?" When Ruan Hongling saw Li Yundong glaring at her, She couldn't help but feel timid and subconsciously took a step back. Go to the internet. 7 KOM. This boy had completely defeated her before he had reached the Zhuji phase. Now that he had reached the Zhuji phase, there was no need to mention it. When Yanhua saw Ruan Hongling looking at Li Yundong with fear in her eyes, he suddenly felt angry and jealous. He was angry because Li Yundong seemed to have really taught Ruan Hongling a lesson before. Otherwise he wouldn't have said the word again. He was jealous because Li Yundong had treated her like this, but Ruan Hongling had accompanied him to this third-rate school. He had flattered her and tried to please her, but she hadn't even smiled at him. Was there any justice in this world? Was there any law? Yanhua puffed out his chest and said loudly, "Don't be afraid, I'm here." Ruan Hongling sneered and thought to herself, "Who do you think you are? You're just a bookworm." Although Li Yundong is hateful, he is the successor of the Jindan stage. Even Sister Ziyuan has to praise him for his talent and cultivation. How can a fool like you compare to him? Hearing her sneer, Yanhua immediately felt that he had been underestimated. He hated her in his heart and shouted at Li Yundong, "What's the point of bullying a girl? If you have the ability, come at me." Li Yundong was so angry that he burst out laughing. "Is bullying a bookworm like you considered a skill?" Li Yundong said. Yanhua sneered and was about to refute when he saw Ruan Hongling turn around and walk out of the cafeteria. Yanhua didn't care about arguing with Li Yundong. He immediately turned around and chased after her. "Hey, don't go, Hongling. Where are you going?" Ruan Hongling turned her head and shouted at him, "Bookworm, it's none of your business where I go. Don't follow me. I'm very annoyed by you." As she said this, she quickly walked out of the cafeteria. Yanhua looked aggrieved. "Hey, why do you also call me a bookworm?" Ruan Hongling stopped, put her hands on her hips and said loudly, "Yes, you are not a bookworm. You are a fool. You are an idiot. Do you understand?" Yanhua was stunned for a moment. "What did I do to offend you? Hey, don't go. Tell me clearly. What did I say wrong or do wrong?" The two of them walked further and further away. Li Yundong looked at their backs and shook his head. He snorted in his heart, then sat down again and ate his rice in a depressed manner. Feng Na, who was standing to one side, pretended to be deep and said, "Alas, Li Yundong, why do you get into trouble wherever you go?" Li Yundong couldn't help but cry out, "It's none of my business." Ching Ching clenched her fists and made a girl's prayer gesture. She said with a smile, "Do you think that trouble can't find you if you keep a low profile? It's useless. A man like you is like a firefly in the dark no matter where you are. You are so bright and outstanding. Your melancholy eyes, elegant hair, outstanding figure, and the braised ribs in the rice bowl in front of you have deeply fascinated me." Before she could finish speaking, Feng Na burst out laughing. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing as well. He pointed at Ching Cheng and Feng Na with his chopsticks and said, "You two, you just want to see the world in chaos." At this time he noticed that Jiang Xiuxiu, who was beside him, had been staring at him in shock. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sit down. Why aren't you eating?" Jiang Xiuxiu's body shook, and she reacted as if she had just woken up from a dream. She remembered what she had said in front of Li Yundong, and her face suddenly turned red. She didn't even eat, covered her face and rushed out. Li Yundong looked at her back and opened his mouth wanting to stop her, but Feng Na couldn't help laughing and said, "Forget it, don't shout. She will only be embarrassed if she stays." Who told her to mistake Feng Jing for Ma Liang? Li Yundong glared at her. "Isn't it all your prank?" Feng Na immediately cried out, "It's none of my business. She didn't give me a chance to speak." Li Yundong laughed and scolded, "You're in the right. Do you still want me to support you to be the president of the student union? Be careful that I don't vote for you." Feng Na immediately smiled apologetically. "Don't be like that." They chatted and laughed. When Li Yundong was about to finish eating, he suddenly remembered something. He asked, "By the way, have you seen Zhou Qin?" Feng Na was stunned for a moment. "Zhou Qin? Isn't she in your class? Why are you asking me?" Li Yundong said, "I haven't seen her all day and I don't know why." Feng Na said carelessly, "Maybe she has something to do." Li Yundong couldn't help frowning as he thought about what had happened between him and Zhou Qin. "I wonder how Zhou Qin is doing. Could it be that my matter brought her a lot of trouble?" Li Yundong wasn't worried that Zhou Qin would betray him. He knew that this girl had a strong character and would keep her word. As long as she said something, she would definitely do it. Her manner of doing things was really not inferior to that of a man. Moreover, if Zhou Qin had betrayed him, he would have been on the run all over the world. How could he sit here and eat in peace? Alas, I owe her a big favor. Li Yundong thought to himself and couldn't help sighing. Feng Na couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? Is there something on your mind? Does it have something to do with Zhou Qin?" Li Yundong didn't want to tell the two girls in front of him about this, not because he didn't trust them, but because if he told them, it would cause them great trouble. Zhou Qin could rely on her strong background to survive, and at worst he could rely on his own skills to become a wild cultivator. But these two girls who had no background were bound to die miserably. Li Yundong shook his head and said, "It's nothing. I just have something to ask her." Feng Na said, "Maybe she'll be back in a few days. Don't worry." But Li Yundong didn't know why, but he always had a vague feeling that something was wrong. He sighed slightly and said, "I hope so, /om/." Chapter 203. Go to watch net. After Li Yundong finished his meal, he read the new books in the classroom in the afternoon. In the evening after school he went to the library to borrow 2 more books. The speed at which he read shocked the old man in the library. He couldn't help but ask a few more questions, but Li Yundong answered all of them fluently. Only then did the old man admit defeat. He shook his head and sighed, then went to get the books for Li Yundong. Watch net. 7 The next day, Li Yundong found that Zhou Qin was still nowhere to be found in the classroom. He went to Sun Li and the homeroom teacher to ask about her, but they both gave him the same answer. No idea. Li Yundong found it more and more strange. She has never skipped class for no reason before, has she? After school in the afternoon, Li Yundong took his bank card to the bank with the intention of giving it a try. As a result, he was surprised to find that all the empty accounts in his card had been filled up, and there was more than 10,000 yuan in his account. Li Yundong was very surprised. He immediately raised the card in his hand and asked Ziyuan, "Will you help me pay back the money on the card?" Ziyuan was meditating in the living room. She sat cross-legged, pinched her fingers, and put the back of her hand on the inside of her thigh. She looked serene and calm with a kind of graceful beauty. She did not open her eyes and said lightly, "Yes. Why would you help me pay back the money?" Ziyuan said, "If you want to cultivate, how can you do it without money? People who worry about their livelihood all day long will never be able to calm their hearts and cultivate." Li Yundong felt that what Ziyuan said was very reasonable, but he was very upset in his heart. He was a dignified man, but he actually needed a woman to help him. How could he bear it? He made up his mind that he had to be self-reliant in the future. Not only did he have to make rapid progress in cultivation, but he also had to have his own career. He couldn't rely on other people's help all day long. However, Li Yundong also knew very well that now was not the time to show off his lofty and unyielding character. Otherwise he would really have to go hungry. As Ziyuan had said, if a cultivator had a problem eating 3 meals a day, how could he cultivate? Magic, wealth, companion, earth, artifact. Among them, earth required a lot of money to support, not to mention the last magical item. Wu Hao had once offered 20 million yuan for Li Yundong's psychic fan of 7 treasures. From this, it could be seen that the matter of magical artifacts was the real burning of money. Li Yundong was not pretentious. He nodded and said to Ziyuan, "Well, I'll borrow it from you first. I'll return it to you later. Watch net." Ziyuan smiled but still didn't open her eyes and didn't speak. Net. _speed. More. Knew seeing that she was cultivating, Li Yundong didn't disturb her too much. He closed the door and left. After he left, she slowly opened her eyes and gave him a meaningful look. A playful smile appeared at the corner of her mouth, and then she slowly closed her eyes. The first thing Li Yundong did was to withdraw 2,000 yuan from the bank and fill his wallet to the brim. He patted his wallet and suddenly felt a sense of security. He sighed to himself. Money is a hero's courage. This is really good. He thought to himself. Although money is not omnipotent and it can't directly buy Shintong or powerful force, without money I can't even carry out the most basic cultivation. Even if I want to treat someone to a meal, I have to think about it for a long time in my heart. Now that I have money, I feel that I have the confidence to talk to people. The so-called rich and overbearing is not unreasonable. Li Yundong said self-deprecatingly, then went straight to the mobile phone store. Although Li Yundong had sold his mobile phone on the road of cultivation, he had kept the SIM card inside. He had picked up a mobile phone that he liked in the mall and inserted the SIM card that he had kept for a long time into it. He had immediately dialed Su Chan's number, but a voice came from the other end of the line. "The number you have dialed is not in the service area. Please try again later." Damn? No way? Li Yundong immediately looked at the phone and couldn't help but curse in a low voice. Did this girl go into the deep mountains and wild forests? Li Yundong had no choice but to send a text message to Su Chan. Girl, I saw the note you left me. I miss you very much. I have succeeded in the Zhuji phase. When I pass the heavenly tribulation, I will come to pick you up. Where are you now? After Li Yundong finished writing the text message and sent it out, he picked up his mobile phone, found Zhou Qin's number in the phone book and dialed it. But when Li Yundong dialed, there was also a voice on the phone. Sorry, the number you have dialed is not available, Why Yuk. Before the voice finished speaking, Li Yundong couldn't help but look at his mobile phone in astonishment and muttered, It's so strange. Why can't I find these two people? This is really strange. Just as Li Yundong was feeling strange, in a military compound in Tianan City, Zhou Qin was being bombarded by a terrible storm. Comrade Zhou Qin, I think it is necessary for me to remind you that as the only witness of the case and the descendant of an official in the system, you should know very well that if you cover up for others, resist stubbornly, and go against the party and the country, you will not end well. In a room with only a table, a few chairs and a dazzling table lamp, a man in a gray Chinese tunic suit was slamming the table and scolding loudly. Next to him was a woman who was taking notes. She was wearing a black business suit. Watch net. 7KOM. Color *** literature _learning % super #speed. Update. In the whole room there was only one window behind Zhou Qin, and it was covered with thick curtains not letting any light in. It was dark all around and the atmosphere was oppressive and dull. Only Zhou Qin was illuminated by the dazzling light, and her face looked very pale. The mysterious disappearance of young Master He had caused a terrible earthquake in the entire Tianan city. Young Master He's father was a provincial governor. How big of a deal was it that his son had disappeared? During the whole process of young Master He's mysterious disappearance, Li Yundong, Zhou Qin, and Ding Nan were important people who had contact with him on video. As for Su Chan, Ziyuan, and Ruan Hongling, because they were cultivators, they went up and down along the way and were not recorded by the surveillance cameras on the road at all. At the beginning, the investigators had locked onto Li Yundong through the surveillance cameras on the road. But when they investigated the scene, they were surprised to find that although there were footprints of young Master He and the others at the scene, there were no clues left behind. There was only a big pit that had been struck by lightning. It was as if young Master He had evaporated into thin air after being struck by lightning. Young Master He's family refused to believe this result. After more than a month of searching, the investigators finally had no choice but to announce that the missing young Master He was most likely dead. Li Yundong was a major suspect. But the problem was that although Li Yundong had appeared at the scene and there was video evidence to prove that he had been chasing after young Master He, there was no direct evidence to prove that Li Yundong was the murderer. Unless this boy could attract lightning and kill young Master He. But as soon as this idea was put forward by the task force, it was scoffed at. Are you kidding me? Our party believes in atheism. How could you come up with such a fantastical thing? Where is your party platform? Where is your party spirit? But at this point the case could no longer be investigated. It had entered a dead zone. Moreover, when the task force was investigating Li Yundong's identity and whereabouts, they faintly felt that there was a force secretly preventing them from investigating the case. Those who worked in the system were very sensitive. Those who dared to go against the governor must be of the same level or even higher. In this way the task force felt that they were in a dilemma and wanted to give up. But the He family didn't think so. Their only son was dead. Although he had done a lot of evil things when he was alive, death was the most important thing. Now they couldn't see him and they couldn't see his corpse. The most hateful thing was that they didn't know whether he was alive or dead, let alone how he had died. Therefore the He family's attitude was to investigate. We must get to the bottom of it and find out the truth. However, there was a lot of resistance to directly investigating Li Yundong. Moreover, Li Yundong's whereabouts were unknown, as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth. Therefore the task force couldn't help but think, why do we have to go far? Therefore they turned their attention to Zhou Qin. This daughter of the Zhou family had witnessed the whole process of the case from the beginning to the end. She must know the whole story. As long as they pried open her mouth, they would definitely be able to solve this case. There was no doubt that the detectives of the task force had indeed grasped the main contradiction, but they did not expect that Zhou Qin would be much more difficult to deal with than they had imagined. From the beginning to the end, Zhou Qin told almost no lies. She told them in detail that young Master He had tried to drug Ding Nan, and then tried to attack Deng Yu and Deng Jiao. In the end, the two girls had fallen from the building and died one after another. Then she told them that young Master He had fled because of fear, and Li Yundong had chased him all the way because of righteous indignation. On the way, young master, he had caused the death of an old woman because of a car accident, and she had shot a young man and continued to flee. In the beginning, the task force did not have any objections to these things because there was a lot of evidence to prove this point. However, when Zhou Qin reached the most critical point, she deliberately ignored the fact that the thunder was caused by Li Yundong. Instead, she only said that young Master He's actions had provoked the wrath of God, who had sent down thunder to strike him to death. When the task force heard this, they immediately sucked in a breath of cold air. They held the confession in a daze as if they were holding a hot potato. Well, from this confession, young Master He was simply the most unredeemable person in the world. Even God could not stand it anymore and struck him to death with a bolt of lightning. If the He family knew about this confession, wouldn't they fly into a rage? The members of the task force questioned Zhou Qin loudly about the authenticity of her words, but Zhou Qin insisted on it. She sneered and said something important. If I can attract heavenly thunder, I will definitely use heavenly thunder to kill this beast. When the member of the task force heard this, he immediately asked, "Do you want to kill him?" This sentence was very dangerous. If Zhou Qin denied it, it would be fine, but as long as Zhou Qin admitted it, she would immediately be listed as an important criminal suspect and interrogated because she had a motive to kill. It was not that Zhou Qin did not know the danger of this sentence, but she said without hesitation, "Of course, everyone has the right to kill a medical beast like him." The special agent shouted, "Why do you hate him so much?" Zhou Qin said angrily, "Go and see what he has done before you ask me this question. If it were you, what would you think if you saw your classmate die in front of you because he could not stand his insults?" The special agent shouted again, "You hate him so much. Did you kill him?" Zhou Qin sneered and said, "I also hate the Japanese. So many people die in Japan every day. Did I kill them too?" Zhou Qin's tough attitude gave the task force a headache. This girl was like a copper pea that could not be smashed, cooked, or flattened. Moreover, like young Master He, she was also the descendant of a high-ranking official. Naturally, they could not use those methods to extort a confession from her. The commissioners of the task force were in a dilemma for a while, and the case did not make any progress. However, the wisdom of humans was endless. A living person would not be suffocated to death by peeing. At that moment, a commissioner had an idea. He proposed to use a move of Tai Chi and throw the report in his hand to the He family and let them decide. This move worked. After the report was handed over to the He family, the case immediately turned for the better. After reading Zhou Qin's confession, the He family immediately flew into a rage. Young Master He's father directed all his anger at Zhou Qin and the Zhou family. He even cursed, "The Zhou family made my He family die, so I won't let them have a good time." Then a political earthquake occurred. The He family quickly contacted their allies and attacked their old friend, the Zhou family, at lightning speed. In the system, who didn't have some dirty things under their butts? Soon, Zhou Kachang's younger brother was arrested for corruption and bribery. Zhou Kachang himself was implicated and was punished by the Commission for Discipline Inspection. Zhou Qin was quickly transferred to the military region and closely monitored. The Zhou family personally sent 2 commissioners to the Tianan military region to take over the case. 2 months ago, Zhou Qin was still a proud daughter of heaven, but in the blink of an eye she had become a prisoner with nothing. A terrible storm was approaching this 20-year-old girl. /OM/ Chapter 204. Go to Watch Network. In the eyes of the people of the task force, it would not take long for a high-ranking official like Zhou Qin to tell the truth after she had lost her power. Go to the Watch Net. 7KOM. In the past she had refused to tell the truth. She must have relied on her family background. But now she was a fallen phoenix. It would not take long for her to tell them everything clearly. But the fact was that Zhou Qin's stubbornness and tenacity had seriously exceeded everyone's expectations. In the face of the aggressive questioning from the man in the Chinese tunic suit, Zhou Qin endured the torture of not eating for 3 days and not sleeping for 2 days. She raised her eyes, looked at the man in front of her coldly and said, "I'm telling the truth. If you don't believe me, there's nothing I can do." The man in the Chinese tunic suit slammed the table angrily, pulled out the notebook of the recorder beside him, and threw it in front of Zhou Qin. He shouted, "Look at it clearly. You said that young Master He was killed by lightning?" Zhou Qin didn't even look at it and said lightly, "Yes." The man in the Chinese tunic suit said angrily, "How could he be killed by lightning there? Who in the world would believe it? What is your intention for protecting Li Jiandong like this?" Zhou Qin suddenly snorted and raised her head. Why are you so diligent in investigating less cases? What is your intention? Although Zhou Qin was so weak that she was gasping for breath after saying a few words, her eyes were full of disdain and unyieldingness. This girl seemed to never know what compromise was and what surrender was. The man in the Chinese tunic suit said angrily, "Zhou Qin, I'm warning you for the last time. Don't play with fire." Zhou Qin sneered and said, "This is the fourth time you've said something like this?" The man in the Chinese tunic suit was furious. He subconsciously wanted to lose his temper, but from the corner of his eyes, he saw the recorder beside him pursing her lips and snickering. These days, those who could enter the Commission for Discipline Inspection as a recorder were definitely not easy to deal with. The background behind them was more and more powerful. The man in the Chinese tunic suit didn't dare to scold her. He just snorted angrily and left. Seeing him leave, the recorder packed up her documents and stood up to follow him out. But before she left, she turned her head and looked at Zhou Qin curiously, her eyes full of confusion. Previously, this girl had been stubborn because she believed that the power and background behind her wouldn't do anything to her. But now, her father had fallen from power. Where did her support come from? Where did her tenacity come from? After the door was closed, Zhou Qin's cold eyes slowly retracted, but she did not show the slightest sign of relief. She still leaned against the chair and lowered her eyes, so that no one could see the emotional changes and psychological activities in her eyes. Watch net. Zhou Qin knew that there were several cameras watching her in this room. Her every move was being watched. As long as she showed the slightest sign of weakness, they would take advantage of it. Zhou Qin was a girl who was very good at observing and thinking about people's hearts. She naturally understood the meaning of the curious glance that the scribe cast at her before he left. In fact, it wasn't just the recorder who didn't understand. Sometimes even Zhou Qin herself didn't understand. Why did he persist like this? For the so-called justice? What kind of joke was this? He had grown up in the system and had long seen through everything. There was no good, evil, beauty, or ugliness in this world, only eternal benefits. But if it wasn't for justice, then what was she doing it for? For Li Yundong? Ah, that should be it. If it wasn't for him, why had she been stubborn until now? But Zhou Qin, was it worth it? Is it worth it? Zhou Qin's red lips parted slightly, and she couldn't help but mutter to herself in a low voice. She suddenly remembered that when she had called Li Yundong to introduce him to a job, she had looked at herself in the mirror and made a conclusion. Zhou Qin, you've fallen in love with such a boy. In the future you will suffer. However, she had never thought that the suffering would be so great, so bitter. Her family had even been destroyed in a day. Was it all worth it? Although the expression on Zhou Qin's face was as cold as frost, she couldn't help but smile bitterly in her heart. If this boy is as devoted to me as he is to Su Chan, then everything I do for him will be worth it. No matter how much suffering I have to suffer, I will gladly endure it. Zhou Qin thought. But he doesn't like you, Zhou Qin. Is it worth it to do this for a boy who doesn't like you? A big question mark appeared in Zhou Qin's mind. At this moment, Zhou Qin's heart suddenly moved, and she felt a little confused. Watch net. Color *** literature _learning % super #speed. Update. Just as she was feeling lost, the door was suddenly pushed open with a creak. Zhou Qin raised her head and was surprised to find that the person who came in was her father. Zhou Qin raised her eyebrows, and her blank and weak expression was instantly hidden behind a cold and hard mask. She sneered coldly and said, "Why is it you? Didn't you get arrested?" In fact, Zhou Qin knew the answer to this question very well. She just couldn't help but mock her father, who was usually high and mighty. Zhou Keqiang was wearing a black suit, and his body was still neat and clean. Other than the fatigue in his eyes, it was hard to tell that he was a cadre who had been investigated. Zhou Keqiang glanced at Zhou Qin, chuckled, and sat down in front of her. The organization wants me to atone for my crimes. You should understand. Of course, Zhou Qin understood. She had indeed been shaken and confused before, but the moment Zhou Keqiang appeared, her shaken heart became firm again. The task force thought that by playing the family card, Zhou Qin would be weak and yield, but in fact this encouraged her strength and tenacity. Zhou Qin sneered and said, "It's fine if they don't know. Do you think you can convince me?" Zhou Keqiang was choked by his daughter. He sighed and said, Qin, no matter what, I am still your father, right? Can you not talk to me in such a tone?" Zhou Qin snorted coldly and turned her head away. Zhou Keqiang took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket. Just as he was about to light it, he suddenly thought of something. He asked Zhou Qin, "Do you mind if I smoke?" Zhou Qin was stunned when she heard this. She couldn't help but look at Zhou Keqiang's face. Suddenly she burst out laughing. Zhou Keqiang, this is the first time you've asked for my opinion like this in my life. It seems that you are mentally prepared to adapt to the life of an ordinary person. Zhou Keqiang was angry, but he quickly restrained himself. He sighed in his heart. The conversation between father and daughter is so full of smoke, so cold and sarcastic. It's really rare in the world. Zhou Keqiang sighed and said, Qin, don't you think you've gone a little too far this time? Not only have I been implicated by you, but your uncle has also been implicated by you. Do you want to bring our family down by yourself? Zhou Qin sneered and said, Comrade Zhou Keqiang, sooner or later you'll have to pay for what you've done. If your butts were clean, would you have ended up in such a situation? A trace of anger flashed in Zhou Keqiang's eyes. He stood up and said angrily, You? Zhou Qin didn't give in at all. She looked at him tit for tat and said, What? Did I say something wrong? Zhou Keqiang took a deep breath and said, Qin, you are an adult. You have to think about what you say and do. If you continue to be so obsessed, you will no longer have a good life in the future. You will go from a high and mighty princess to a pile of mud in the ground. Zhou Qin said coldly, You don't have to worry about that. I don't care about this kind of life. I have hands and feet and I can support myself in the future. Zhou Keqiang was annoyed and hateful when he saw that Zhou Qin was stubborn. He slapped the table and shouted, Are you crazy? What nonsense are you talking about? What the hell is wrong with you? Is it because of that boy named Li Yundong? Qin, wake up, will you? I've investigated this boy. He has no interest in you at all. Is it worth it for you to ruin your family like this for him? Zhou Qin's heart suddenly trembled, and the previous question came to her mind again. A trace of sadness flashed in her eyes, but she still said stubbornly, Don't call him a boy. He is much more manly than most men in this world. Zhou Keqiang said angrily, So what? Even if you have done so much for him, does he know? Will he be moved? Will he be grateful to you? Do you think that after you have done so much, he will change his mind and like you? Qin, don't be silly. He won't change his mind. This sentence was like an iron hammer, hitting Zhou Qin's heart hard and making her tremble all over. Zhou Qin couldn't help but think of what Su Chan had said to him while crying and comforting him after Li Yundong had killed He Xiao with heavenly thunder. At worst, when the divine tribulation comes, I will die with you. I have been happy with you for so many days. It's not a big deal to die. What had Li Yundong said at that time? Yes, he had said at that time, You know me best. Others say that you are a witch, but in my opinion, you are the most lovely and considerate woman in the world. How can I, Li Yundong, have a woman like you as my companion? Thinking of the scene at that time, Zhou Qin felt as if her heart was being stabbed by a knife, and tears almost fell from her eyes. There seemed to be two people in Zhou Qin's mind. One said, Zhou Qin, don't be silly. Li Yundong won't choose you. But the other said, But Zhou Qin, don't you want to know whether this boy has you in his heart or not? If you give up everything for him, will this boy look at you more and like you a little more? This voice suddenly made Zhou Qin's heart tremble. She suddenly opened her eyes wide, like a desperate person seeing a glimmer of heaven. Zhou Qin lowered her eyes to hide the drastic changes in her inner world. However, the closest relative in front of her did not notice Zhou Qin's psychological activities at all. Zhou Qin took a deep breath and said slowly, Dad, do you remember the painting I drew at my birthday party last time? Zhou Keqiang was stunned. Yes, what about it? Zhou Qin smiled faintly. Dad, I said at that time that no matter how similar a butterfly was, it was impossible for it to fly out of this frame. Zhou Keqiang was confused. So what? Zhou Qin smiled and said, It's nothing. You won't understand, and I don't expect you to understand, because you have never understood since you were a child. Zhou Keqiang became more and more confused. What do you mean? Zhou Qin shook her head and said, It's nothing. Just think of me as a willful daughter. I've had enough of these restrictions. I want to be free to choose for myself. Zhou Keqiang stood up in shock and anger. Are you crazy? You'll regret it. Zhou Qin smiled slightly. Whether I regret it or not is my own business. It has nothing to do with you. Everyone only has one path in life. The path is walked by oneself and it is also chosen by oneself. I will not regret it. After Zhou Qin finished speaking, she watched her desperate father walk out of the room step by step, as if he had become a statue again. Her eyes wandered around the cold and dark room. When she saw the window covered by thick curtains, her eyes stopped and she sighed faintly in her heart. Li Yundong, will you look at me again? Just as Zhou Qin had made up her mind, Li Yundong was preparing to start the cultivation of the fifth heaven of Shintong at home in Hongxing New District. /om/ Chapter 205. Go to Watch Network. After school in the afternoon, Li Yundong returned home and found Ziyuan sitting cross-legged in the living room of his home. As soon as he entered the door, she opened her eyes. Li Yundong laughed and said, "I should charge you rent." The implication of these words was that he was making fun of Ziyuan for staying in his home all day long. There was also a hint of ambiguity in the subtext. If it had been another girl, her heart might have skipped a beat and she would have chewed over the meaning of Li Yundong's words repeatedly. However, Ziyuan was ethereal and said lightly, "How have you been reading these days?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Not bad." "What? Why do you suddenly ask?" Ziyuan didn't answer. Instead, she asked with a serious expression, "What is cultivation?" A small part of Li Yundong's cultivation kung fu had been taught by Su Chan, a small part had been learned by chance, and a small part had been taught by Ziyuan. Although Li Yundong didn't know why Ziyuan wanted to teach him cultivation kung fu, he subconsciously regarded Ziyuan as his master. When Li Yundong heard Ziyuan's question, his heart suddenly trembled and he said, "Buddha said that the world is full of suffering. I wish to seek the other side in order to be at peace. The process of seeking peace to the other side is cultivation." Ziyuan didn't comment and asked again, "What is cultivation?" Li Yundong said, "To learn Taoism and cultivate is to seek the true self, get rid of the false and retain the true. This is cultivation." After hearing this, Ziyuan nodded slightly, and a hint of appreciation flashed in her eyes. "Yes, I've seen you reading Buddhist classics and Taoist classics these days. I was afraid that you would be possessed by the devil and lose the distinction between Buddhism and Taoism." Li Yundong chuckled. If she had asked him these two questions a few days ago, he would have been confused and definitely regarded cultivation and Taoism as the same thing. But now, after reading many classics of Buddhism and Taoism, he could naturally distinguish them clearly. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Is it that serious? In my opinion, Buddhism focuses on cultivation while Taoism focuses on Taoism. Although one focuses on practice and the other on truth, in fact they have one thing in common, that is, cultivation." Hearing this, Ziyuan became interested and asked, "Oh? What do you mean by that?" Li Yundong was not in a hurry to explain. He simply sat cross-legged on the floor of the living room. He noticed that there was a futon where Ziyuan was sitting. He smiled and said, "Did you bring this yourself?" Ziyuan nodded and asked, "Do you know why people who meditate need a cushion under their feet?" Li Yundong paused. "I don't know." Ziyuan smiled and said, "Take your time to think about it. Now you can continue with the topic just now. Watch net. Li Yundong shifted his attention from the futon to explaining cultivation and cultivation. He said, "The cultivation of cultivation is the same as that of cultivation. They are both methods. Cultivation is about the process of understanding, while cultivation is about getting rid of the false and retaining the true through a certain cultivation method." As he spoke, he glanced at Ziyuan. She nodded and said, "You're right. Go on." Li Yundong was encouraged and said, "In my opinion, there is no need to make such a clear distinction between cultivation and cultivation." Ziyuan said disapprovingly, "For thousands of years, Buddhism and Taoism have been incompatible like fire and water. The two cannot exist side by side. How can they be confused?" Li Yundong shook his head. He gave an example and said, "If I go to Beijing, I can choose to walk or take a plane. What's the difference? They all go to the same place. The only difference is that taking a plane is much faster than walking." Ziyuan retorted, "Isn't speed the biggest difference?" Li Yundong waved his hand and said with a smile, No, speed has its advantages, but it also has its disadvantages. Buddhists pay more attention to the process of cultivation just like walking to Beijing. Although it is slow, it is precisely because he walked step by step that he saw the scenery and people along the way. It can be said that he has seen all kinds of people in the world. It doesn't matter whether he can reach the end or not, because he has already completed his cultivation. Watch net. 7 km. As for those who go by plane, although the speed is fast, they are only looking at the flowers on horseback. They can only appreciate the pleasure of looking down from a high place, but they have no time to see the true face of the world. Even if they reach the end, how can they get rid of the false and retain the true in this complicated world? Ziyuan's expression changed. Originally, she had just wanted to warn Li Yundong so that he wouldn't go crazy between Buddhism and Taoism. That was why she had asked, but she hadn't expected that Li Yundong would actually say his own unique opinion. How long had he been reading books and how long had he been in contact with cultivation? How could he say such a thing? Could it be that he was really a cultivation genius that had not been seen for 100 years? For thousands of years, there had been countless disciples of the Jingyi school, and there were countless geniuses among them. Ziyuan had seen too many, but it was the first time in her life that someone like Li Yundong, who had been in contact with cultivation for such a short period of time, had made such rapid progress. She looked at Li Yundong in surprise and said, "Go on?" Li Yundong smiled again and said, "Of course you can also say it the other way around. There are yin and yang sides to everything. Take walking to Beijing for example. Although walking can allow people to see all kinds of things in the world because cultivation is too hard, it is even possible that people will spend their whole lives on this road. Moreover, there may be all kinds of dangers. 9 out of 10 they will not reach the end and give up halfway. Although taking a plane is just a glance at the flowers on horseback and you can't see all kinds of things in the world, this kind of cultivation can stand high and see far. You can see the scenery that you can't see standing on the ground, and you can experience feelings that ordinary people can't." Ziyuan said, "What do you mean by saying so much?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "In short, whether it's a black cat or a white cat, as long as it can catch mice, it's a good cat. Whether it's Buddhism or Taoism, if it can cultivate the great way, it's a big shot." Ziyuan laughed and said, "Then you still haven't made clear the difference between Buddhism and Taoism?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "Why should I make it clear? Didn't I say it? As long as I can reach my destination, whether it's walking or taking a plane, as long as I can achieve the purpose of cultivation, it's good. Because walking is good and taking a plane is good. There is no perfect thing in this world. In my opinion, if I want to experience all kinds of things in the world, I will walk just like when I went to Tibet. If I want to move forward quickly, I will take a plane. In short, choose different methods according to your different needs. Why do you have to distinguish between Buddhism and Taoism?" Li Yundong said with a smile. Ziyuan's face was full of shock, and her mind was suddenly a little confused. She subconsciously wanted to deny Li Yundong's point of view, but she didn't know how to say it. Ever since she had been conscious, her master and grandmaster had been telling her that Buddhism and Taoism were different, and they couldn't be combined into one. This concept was equivalent to someone telling her that heaven and earth were different, and they couldn't be combined into one. However, why couldn't they be combined into one? Ziyuan had never thought about it. Just as she had once said to Li Yundong, "The road is under your feet, but sometimes people ignore it and don't pay attention to it. Why is it called buying things instead of buying north and south? Why is it called sleeping peacefully instead of sleeping peacefully? Why do people have to sit cross-legged when cultivating?" This was something that many people saw, but they took it for granted. They had never thought about why, and Ziyuan was the same. She had always known that Buddhism and Taoism couldn't be practiced together, but she didn't know why it couldn't be practiced together. It was just like how Li Yundong had never thought about why people needed a cushion under their buttocks when they sat cross-legged. Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. She had never been shocked by Li Yundong's diligent cultivation before, because in her opinion, it was just the help of Renyuan Jindan. In addition, this boy did have perseverance and perseverance. This kind of person was everywhere in the cultivation world. There were as many carps in the river, and there was nothing remarkable about it. But now, Ziyuan had to look at this boy with new eyes. "I've read a lot of scriptures since I was a child. I don't know how many classics of Buddhism and Taoism I've read. I didn't expect that today I would be shocked by a boy who has cultivated for less than half a year." Ziyuan was shocked and sighed in her heart. It's true that learning doesn't care about age, and those who reach first come first. This person's comprehension ability is really outstanding. Li Yundong didn't know the shock in Ziyuan's heart. He asked with a smile, "Why did you suddenly ask me this question today?" Ziyuan came to her senses. She calmed herself down and said, "I was worried that you would read the cultivation classics of Buddhism and Taoism at the same time. I was afraid that you would be lost in the different cultivation theories of the two schools and be unable to extricate yourself. That's why I asked you. Now that I see that you understand the truth so well, I think it's time to teach you Shentong." When Li Yundong heard this, he was surprised and delighted. He couldn't help but be excited and said, "I can learn Shentong?" Ziyuan nodded and said, "When you first completed the Zhuji phase, you could actually learn Shentong, but at that time your theoretical foundation of cultivation was too poor. You didn't understand a lot of things and you didn't understand a lot of principles. But I saw that you have been reading the classics without eating or sleeping for the past few days, and you already have a certain theoretical foundation. You know how to start thinking about various cultivation problems. Then I can start teaching you the realm of the 5th level of cultivation." When Li Yundong thought that he could use a powerful magic like the Fan of 7 Treasures with Shentong, he couldn't help but be so excited that he wanted to scratch his heart and lungs. He couldn't help but ask, "Can I learn it now?" Seeing that he was so anxious, Ziyuan couldn't help but pull a long face and shout, "Look at how anxious you are. Not to mention learning Shentong, you even have basic luck problems now." Li Yundong's expression became serious. He took a deep breath and sent the qi into his dantian. His whole body suddenly calmed down and he said solemnly, "I've learned something." Ziyuan nodded and continued, "Well, today I'll teach you the 5th level of cultivation, Shentong. Sorry, I went out for dinner. The update is late. /om/. Chapter 206. Go to the Internet? Ziyuan was a cultivator who liked to ask why. She had to ask why everything happened. She had to figure things out before she gave up. Go to the Internet. 7 It was the same when she taught Li Yundong cultivation. From the very beginning she taught Li Yundong to take the initiative to think, what is cultivation? Until now she had begun to teach Li Yundong the most important Shentong in cultivation. She still started with a rhetorical question. What is Shentong? Ziyuan sat cross-legged. Her appearance and bearing were like a pine tree. She was like a master of a sect, which was not to be underestimated. Li Yundong had read the Surengama Sutra and the records of Zong Jinglu before, so he said without hesitation, "Shentong is different in Buddhism and Taoism." Ziyuan asked, "What's the difference?" Li Yundong explained, "Buddhism believes that Shentong is the ability to understand things. Shentong is divided into 3 categories: heavenly eyes, heavenly ears, otherworldly mind, Shentong, predestination, and omniscience. Taoism's Shentong is not divided into so many realms. Taoism believes that there are 5 kinds of Shentong in heaven and earth, which are Tao Tong, Shentong, Yi Tong, and Yao Tong. The Shentong among them is the way for cultivators to reach the God realm through the cultivation of the mind." Ziyuan smiled and asked, "What's the difference between the other 4 Shentong and the Shentong?" Li Yundong continued, "Tao Tong refers to those who have cultivated to the extreme in theory and knowledge and thus become saints. For example, Laozi, Confucius, Mencius in the preaching period, and Wang Yangming in the Ming dynasty. Yi Tong refers to some medicinal baits in heaven and earth that have gathered the lingqi of heaven and earth and become spiritual creatures, such as the spirit of ginseng and so on. Yi Tong refers to the lingering spirits of the dead who have not been reincarnated and finally become demons and ghosts. Go to the Internet. Yao Tong refers to the fox turning into a spirit, and the wood and stone turning into demons. This refers to Yao Tong." Speaking of this, Li Yundong couldn't help but mutter in his heart, "So the little girl is a demon?" She nodded and said, "That's right. There are 5 ways to obtain extremely powerful strength in this world. First you have to learn. When your knowledge reaches the level of Confucius and Laozi, you will be able to mobilize the noble spirit between heaven and earth. Even if you don't know magic, you will be invulnerable to all evil. Even if demons and ghosts see you, they will have to take a detour and not dare to offend you. Therefore, in this world, there is a saying that all things are inferior, and only those who study well are superior." Ziyuan's words made Li Yundong's heart skip a beat. He was more and more sure that he wanted to read a lot of books. Ziyuan said, "As the saying goes, there is beauty in books, and there is a house of gold in books. Actually, there's another saying, there's a path to heaven in books." Li Yundong couldn't help but reply, "I'm very touched by this sentence. In the past, when I read these books, I only felt that they were like heavenly books. Reading one more word would make me feel dizzy. But now I feel that every word is a gem. I can understand a lot from every famous sentence." Ziyuan nodded with a smile and said, "Well, I'll ask you one last time. How many levels are there in heaven? How many levels of cultivation are there?" Li Yundong remembered what Su Chan had told him. He said, "There are 9 levels of heaven, so there are 9 levels of cultivation, right?" Ziyuan nodded and asked, "Well, my question is, why is Shentong at the 5th level of the 9 levels of heaven?" Li Yundong had been reading these days, forgetting to eat and sleep. Ordinary questions couldn't be asked at all, but this question stunned Li Yundong. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Is there a reason for this order?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "There is a difference between the young and the old." "Why is there no reason?" "You have to remember that the 9 levels of cultivation are not randomly arranged. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, "Well then why?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "In fact it's very simple. Do you know why the emperor is called the emperor?" Li Yundong's eyes lit up and he said, "Ah, I understand. The ancients believed that there were 9 levels in heaven and earth. 9 was the biggest and had the most noble meaning, and 5 was in the middle position and had the meaning of harmony. Look at the net. When these two numbers are combined, they are both noble and harmonious. They are extremely auspicious and are the most appropriate symbol for the emperor." Ziyuan nodded and said, "That's right. Shentong is ranked at the 5th level, which means that the cultivation of this level is the most important level of the 9 levels of heaven. It teaches you how to be the emperor of heaven and earth, and how to be your own emperor." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Isn't the Zhuji phase of the 4th level the most important?" Ziyuan said, "Zhuji phase is just a watershed. If you can pass the Zhuji phase, it means that you have the strength to compete for the world, but you can't be the emperor yet. But when you complete the 5th level of heaven, you can already become the king of the world. Not only can you be your own emperor, but you can also be the emperor of heaven and earth. Because at that time, you have the power to move mountains and fill seas. What the emperor can do, you can also do." Li Yundong's eyes couldn't help but light up when he heard this. Who didn't want to be the ruler of heaven and earth and have the power to move mountains and fill seas? Especially after Ao Wushuang showed him the power of her Taoist magic, Li Yundong became even more eager to cultivate. He wanted to become stronger than anyone else, even stronger than God. However, Li Yundong was not blinded by his desire. He asked cautiously, "Will the heavenly tribulation come after I practice Shentong?" Ziyuan nodded at him and said, "Yes, Shentong can make you extremely powerful, so from now on, God will be watching you every minute and every second. If you don't practice Shentong, although the heavenly tribulation will come sooner or later, if you are good at hiding and biding your time, you can at least live for more than 20 years. But once you practice Shentong, there will be no room for maneuver. You have to face the most terrible power in the world, the heavenly thunder." Ziyuan said with a serious face, "You have to think about it carefully." Li Yundong laughed and said, "What's the point of living a mediocre life? Even if you live longer than a turtle, what's the point? There's no need to think about it. I must practice Shentong and I will definitely pass the heavenly tribulation." Ziyuan saw that Li Yundong was full of confidence, but she didn't know where his confidence came from. She said, "Well then I'll teach you Shentong. Now close your eyes, sink your qi into your dantian, gather the 3 flowers above your head, and gather the 5 qis above your head. Then, mobilize the Niden in your body and gather the Jinqi in your body to the top of your head. When this Jinqi is refined, you have to deliberately control this refined qi to go to your Niden." Li Yundong listened carefully and nodded to show that he understood. He asked, "Then what?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "Then? That's it. You should strengthen your Niden first." Li Yundong almost fainted. "What? You've said so much, beating around the bush, how can it be so simple? Are you kidding me?" Ziyuan smiled and said, "Goth's conjecture is just asking you what 1 + 1 equals. It looks very simple, but no one in the world has been able to solve it yet. You should do this first." Li Yundong's eyes were wide open, and he refused to believe Ziyuan's words. Seeing him like this, Ziyuan had no choice but to explain, "Why can't you understand? The various auras in your body are equivalent to various metals such as gold, silver, copper, iron, and so on. What you have to do is to gather these metals in your 3 dantians. With the help of the furnace in your body, you can refine these metals into various currencies that can be used for trading. In other words, you have to turn these things into money. The Jinqi in your body is money. If you encounter something, you have to take out money to buy or settle something." Ziyuan made a very vulgar but easy to understand analogy. There are many countries in the world and there are many kinds of goods, but the function of money is the same. It can be circulated and exchanged, and so is Jinqi. The divine ability technique is to strengthen your true essence and make you rich. Then you can buy whatever you want and learn whatever spells you want. You can learn whatever spells you want. You can learn whatever spells you want to learn. This metaphor made Li Yundong understand all of a sudden. He suddenly said, "I see, I understand. You can say that this is learning a passive halo. As for magic, this is an active skill. The passive halo has a bonus effect on the active skill." Seeing that Li Yundong's analogy was even more vulgar than hers, Ziyuan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She thought to herself, "If the senior cultivators heard you make such an analogy of cultivation, they would be so angry that they would smoke from their 7 orifices." After Li Yundong understood, he didn't say anything more. He closed his eyes and quickly entered a meditative state. Although Li Yundong had only been cultivating for a short time, he had the help of the Renyuan Jin Dan and the enlightenment of Su Chan. Later he had gone through a difficult journey to cultivate, and his body and the Yuanyang Qi in his body had become extremely strong and solid. In fact, his cultivation kung fu was no less than that of many cultivators who had been cultivating for more than a decade or even decades. In just a short while, a white line as thick as a pinky finger rose from the top of Li Yundong's head. He could clearly feel that the essence, blood, and qi in his body were continuously gathering in the dantian above his head. The qi of the 5 viscera in his body was also running to the top of his head with the essence, blood, and qi. For a moment, the 3 flowers gathered above his head, and the 5 qis gathered in his head. After the essence, blood, and qi of the 5 viscera were refined into qi on the top of his head, Li Yundong quickly mobilized this qi to rush to the Niden in his lower dantian. In this way, an endless inner cycle was formed. The Niden constantly released jinqi to stimulate the human body to produce essence, blood, and qi, while essence, blood, and qi constantly stimulated the 5 viscera to secrete viscera qi. The two converged on the top of the head and passed through the human body, which was the furnace, to refine the 3 elements and the 5 qi into jinqi. Then this jinqi was sent back to the Niden by Li Yundong, thus strengthening the Niden, stimulating it to produce more jinqi and stimulating more essence, blood, and qi of the 5 viscera to be secreted and produced. The ancients said that man and nature were one. The world between heaven and earth was a big universe, and the human body was a small universe. There were many similarities between the two. The biggest similarity was that there was an endless self-circulating force between heaven and earth, and there was also such a force in the human body. This force was the power of Shintong. After about 2 or 3 hours, Li Yundong slowly opened his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he found that Ziyuan was also meditating motionlessly. As soon as Li Yundong's gaze fell on her jade-like cheeks, she woke up slowly. Ziyuan glanced at Li Yundong and said, "You're awake? How do you feel?" Li Yundong chuckled and said, "I feel good, but I don't feel like I have any Shintong power. I feel like I'm the same as before. There's no difference." Ziyuan smiled. She looked at the fan of the 7 treasures, which was not far away from Li Yundong, and said, "You can try to transfer your jinqi to the fan of the 7 treasures and see what will happen." Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat. His eyes fell on the fan of the 7 treasures, and his heart couldn't help pounding. This fan of the 7 treasures is already so powerful when it doesn't have mana. What will happen when it has mana? /om/ Chapter 207. Go to WatchNet. He took a deep breath, held his breath, and slowly gathered his jinqi toward the fan of 7 treasures. WatchNet. 7 At first, there was nothing strange about the fan of 7 treasures. The jinqi that Li Yundong had gathered was like a stone ox sinking into the sea, with no reaction at all. Li Yundong looked up at Ziyuan in surprise. She seemed to understand what was on his mind and asked, "You want to buy something worth 1 million with 100,000? Is that even possible?" Li Yundong understood in his heart, so she's saying that my jinqi isn't enough. She can just say it directly. Why does this girl always like to beat around the bush? Ziyuan seemed to be able to read his mind. She said, "If I didn't do this, you wouldn't have developed the habit of thinking hard. On the path of cultivation, the scarier thing than qi deviation is not being diligent in thinking." Li Yundong smiled and didn't say anything. He continued to concentrate on transferring the jinqi in his body. When Li Yundong continued to transmit it for about 5 minutes, he found that the fan of 7 treasures suddenly jumped faintly, but the movement was extremely slight. Li Yundong even wondered if his eyes were playing tricks on him and he had seen it wrong. But after a while, the fan of 7 treasures suddenly moved again. Only then did Li Yundong believe that the fan of 7 treasures was moving on its own. No one would believe that a heavy and cold iron fan could move on its own. If Li Yundong hadn't experienced so many things himself, he would probably have scoffed at it. However, the truth was right in front of them and they had no choice but to believe it. In the beginning, the fan of 7 treasures was like a fish that had just died, jumping up and down from time to time. But after a while, it began to tremble incessantly, making the clanging sound of the fan blades touching each other. If Li Yunyang hadn't seen that everything else around him was calm, he would have thought that there had been a small earthquake here, causing the fan of 7 treasures to tremble. WatchNet. Li Yundong's eyes widened. He didn't understand why the magical item would have such a reaction and change when he injected jinqi into the fan of 7 treasures. But when he thought about it and used the various knowledge he had learned to ponder over this problem, he came to a realization. In Li Yundong's opinion, the biggest difference between the Yuanyang Qi and the Jinqi in the body in the past was that the Yuanyang Qi was the Qi inside the human body. When it was in the human body, it could be controlled by the human will. But once it was released outside the body, it could no longer be controlled. It was like a bullet that had been shot out of the barrel. It was impossible to change it halfway. However, true essence Qi was different. True essence Qi was the most essential thing refined from primordial Yang Qi. It was emitted from the Niden and condensed without dissipating. Even if it was released from the human body, it could still be controlled by the cultivator. It was like a tentacle extending out of the human body. It could touch things, and if the tentacle was strong enough, it could even grab some objects. This was the simplest divine ability, telekinesis. When this power was large to a certain extent, this purest power could grab all kinds of things in the world at will for its own use. Just like Su Chan's master Ao Wushuang, she could summon the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire, and earth to attack the opponent. As Li Yundong continued to inject Jinqi into the fan of 7 treasures, he could feel that there was a force in the fan that was constantly resisting his Jinqi. But as he continued to inject it, this resistance was weakening little by little. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't help thinking, could it be that this is the spiritual power left by the previous owner of the magical item? If I dispel this spiritual power now and inject my own spiritual power into it, will this fan of 7 treasures have my spiritual power and listen to my command? Thinking of this, Li Yundong felt that he had suddenly become enlightened in the way of divine ability. He no longer held back and subconsciously increased the strength of the Jinqi in his body, continuously sending it into the fan of 7 treasures. Watch net. Chunjong, the fan of 7 treasures, was originally a special magical item of the patriarch of the Fox Zen school, the Rock Fox. It could not be used by those with extremely powerful magical powers. But after thousands of years since the mystical silver fox, the Fox Zen school had been full of yin and yang. No male fox could use such a magical item. Over the long years, the strong spiritual power condensed by the Rock Fox on such a magical item slowly dissipated. Li Yundong continued to inject Jinqi, which was the process of expelling the spiritual power condensed by the Rock Fox on such a magical item. If it had been more than 1,000 years ago when the Rock Fox had condensed the spiritual power on the fan of 7 treasures at its peak, with Li Yundong's current magical power, even if he didn't eat or drink for a year or two, he might not be able to get rid of the Jinqi mark on the fan. He might even be devoured by the power in the magical item. But after more than 1,000 years, even the majestic buildings had been weathered like sand and stones, let alone this kind of magical item. After Li Yundong continued to inject spiritual power for more than an hour, the fan of 7 treasures finally stopped resisting, and the treasure fan slowly calmed down again. Li Yundong let out a long breath and exhaled a mouthful of white air. He felt as if he had used up all the Jinqi in his body just now, and he felt empty all over. Just as Li Yundong was about to stop and take a rest, he heard Ziyuan say, "Don't rest. Controlling a magical item is like controlling a beast. If you can't conquer it when it's at its weakest and most empty, when it comes back to its senses, it will be twice the effort and half the result if you want to conquer it again." Li Yundong had no choice but to cheer up. He took a deep breath and once again urged the Jinqi in his body to inject into the fan of 7 treasures. This input was incredible. Li Yundong suddenly stared at the fan of 7 treasures in front of him, shocked beyond belief. Wherever Li Yundong's Jinqi went, the fan of 7 treasures would emit a faint golden light. When the Jinqi flowed to the leaves of the fan, the golden Sanskrit characters on the leaves also shone brightly. After a while, the fan of 7 treasures suddenly jumped up. With a swoosh, all the leaves of the fan opened, like a peacock spreading its tail. In an instant, the room was filled with golden light. After the fan of 7 treasures opened in an instant, the ribs on both sides of the fan did not move. The blades in the middle seemed to have become active, rotating at a high speed like the gears of a fan. They were so fast that they almost formed afterimages, making a dense clanging sound. In this afterimage, the golden Sanskrit characters on the fan of 7 treasures burned like flames in the golden light, jumping and ready to come out. Li Yundong only felt that these burning golden Sanskrit characters were condensing a powerful force, majestic and powerful, like Buddha preaching sutras and Vajra glaring at him. The fan of 7 treasures seemed to have a life of its own. It slowly turned around in the room, and when it faced Ziyuan, it couldn't help but shine with golden light. The burning golden Sanskrit characters on the leaves of the fan became extremely vigorous, as if in the next second, these characters would turn into golden flames and pounce on Ziyuan, burning her to ashes. Li Yundong was tongue-tied and said, "What's going on?" In the face of the strong hostility of the fan of 7 treasures, Ziyuan's expression did not change, as if she could not feel this power. She said lightly, "This is the process of the magical item recognizing its master. Just like when a small animal first opens its eyes, it will subconsciously regard the first thing it sees as its mother. However, the magical item has intelligence. It will immediately find a master with the same aura as itself and reject other auras around it." Li Yundong said curiously, "It's really amazing." He saw that the leaves of the fan of 7 treasures were spinning fast like a chainsaw, and the golden Sanskrit characters around the leaves were like flames. He wanted to reach out and touch it, but he didn't dare. Li Yundong couldn't help asking, "Then how do I use it?" Ziyuan said, "When the magical item just recognizes its master, it will automatically protect you. You don't need to deliberately use it. But when your spiritual power is far greater than its own, you can try to refine and transform it to give it more powerful power." Li Yundong asked excitedly, "What should I do?" Ziyuan smiled faintly and said, "That's a matter for the future. You can think about it yourself. Now you can say hello to your first magic tool. From now on, it will be your exclusive possession. You must always keep it by your side. You must never let it leave your hand for even half an inch. However, you must remember that when you encounter a cultivator with stronger spiritual power than you, don't force yourself to fight, lest he snatches your magical item and forcibly erases your mark. In that case, your magical item will become someone else's." Li Yunyang secretly remembered it in his heart. He nodded and then boldly reached out to touch the extremely dazzling fan of 7 treasures. As soon as Li Yundong's fingers touched the fan of 7 treasures, it suddenly trembled violently. Then, with a swoosh, it quickly closed. The golden light and the jumping characters in the room disappeared in an instant. The fan of 7 treasures, which weighed more than 50 kilograms, turned into a black and thick iron lump, floating on Li Yundong's chest, motionless. Li Yundong was secretly surprised. He reached out and touched the end of the fan's bone. Suddenly, the end of the fan emitted a faint golden light. He became more and more curious. He touched it from bottom to top. Wherever his fingertips passed, there was a wave of golden ripples, which was very beautiful. Looking at him, Ziyuan suddenly remembered the scene when her master had handed her her first magical item. She couldn't help but fall into endless thoughts and her eyes became very soft. Ziyuan couldn't help but smile and say, "From today on, you are an official cultivator. Li Yundong, welcome to the world of cultivators. /om/" Chapter 208. Go to Watch Net. Early the next morning, Tianan City was once again jammed with traffic. By the time Li Yundong arrived at Tianan University with the fan of 7 treasures on his back, it was already 9:30 a.m. Watch Net. 7 km. Li Yundong couldn't help but mutter to himself as he got out of the car, "I wonder when I'll be able to fly to school. I won't have to suffer from traffic jams anymore." Li Yundong walked into the school with the fan of 7 treasures on his back. As soon as he entered the school, he ran into Feng Na. "Li Yundong." Feng Na's voice was clear and crisp. As soon as she shouted, those who knew Li Yundong turned their heads and looked at her with different expressions. Li Yundong had learned to live under such attention. He smiled at Feng Na and said, "What's the matter, future president of the student council? What can I do for you?" Feng Na waved her hand and smilingly said, "Don't make fun of me. We haven't even started yet. By the way, I'm attending a campaign speech tomorrow. Are you coming?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Okay, I'll definitely come. When exactly?" Feng Na smiled and said, 7:30 p.m., the school's small auditorium. As soon as he heard about the auditorium, Li Yundong couldn't help but think of the storm caused by the days of living with a stewardess incident. He subconsciously didn't want to go there. He smiled awkwardly and said, "Why did you choose this place?" Feng Na had also thought of this matter. She giggled and said, "What does it have to do with me? Do you think I want to?" As they walked side by side into the school, Li Yundong said, "Where's Ching Ching? Isn't she inseparable from you?" Feng Na sighed and said, "Alas, don't mention it. I'm in my senior year and I'm about to graduate. I'm about to enter the big vat that is society. I'm busy looking for a job." Li Yundong said in surprise, "It's only the beginning of the 4th year. Are you busy looking for a job?" Feng Na smiled. Clumsy birds have to start flying early. Ching Cheng's family background isn't very good. This summer she's interning at a company. Once she becomes an intern, she might be able to become a permanent employee. So, she won't be coming to some classes for now. She'll try her best to settle her work first. Li Yundong asked, "What about you? Do you have any intention of working?" Feng Na sighed. "How can it be that easy? How hard was it to find a good job these days? I want to work at a TV station, but I can't get in because I don't have any connections." Hearing this, Li Yundong secretly sighed in his heart. If he hadn't embarked on the path of cultivation, perhaps in another year, he would also have to worry about all kinds of employment problems like Ching Cheng and Feng Na. Watch net. Feng Na turned to look at Li Yundong and asked with a smile, "What about you? What's your plan?" Li Yundong chuckled and said with emotion, "I don't have any plans. I'm just a layman with no ambition." Feng Na pointed a finger at Li Yundong and laughed. "Excessive modesty equals arrogance." Li Yundong smiled and said, "I'm not being modest. I really haven't thought about what I want to do after graduation." As he said this, he sighed and looked at the familiar campus. He sighed and said, "I just feel that the days pass so quickly. In the blink of an eye, I'm almost a senior. More than half of my college life has passed." Feng Na sighed. "Yeah, that's why I have to find a way to add something important to my resume during my senior year. Otherwise, I won't run for the president of the student council." Li Yundong smiled. "Feng Na, you'll be fine. With your qualifications, you'll definitely be the #1 actress in our Tianan TV station in the future." Feng Na smiled sweetly. "Thank you for your auspicious words." While the two of them were talking, Feng Na had already reached the bottom of the teaching building. Seeing that Li Yundong had no intention of going to class, she couldn't help but ask, "You don't have any classes this morning?" Li Yundong smiled and patted the bag hanging on top of the fan of 7 treasures. "I'm going to the library to return some books." Feng Na's eyes fell on the fan of 7 treasures, which was tightly wrapped in black cloth on Li Yundong's back. She couldn't help but ask curiously, "What on earth are you carrying? Last time I saw you carrying such a big and long thing, I wanted to ask you about it." Li Yundong smiled and dodged the question. "It's nothing. It's just something very important." Feng Na saw that Li Yundong was being vague, but she didn't pursue the matter. Instead, she just let out an "oh." The curiosity in her eyes grew. She watched as Li Yundong walked a few meters away. Suddenly she shouted, "Li Yundong?" Li Yundong stopped in his tracks and turned around to look at her. Feng Na stared at Li Yundong. "You're going to be an amazing person in the future," she said in a serious tone. Li Yundong smiled. "Why do you say that all of a sudden?" Feng Na put her hands behind her back and shook her head. "There's no reason. I just feel that a boy like you will definitely achieve great things in the future. Maybe you will become the boss of a big company." Li Yundong laughed. "I'm already a man with negative assets. How can I be the boss of a big company? But thanks for your kind words. Is this considered reciprocity?" Feng Na chuckled. "No, I really think so. Who knows, maybe Ching Cheng and I will go to you in the future. You have to give us a bowl of rice to eat." Li Yundong didn't care. He smiled. "Fine. You sent yourself to my door and let me, a capitalist with negative assets, exploit you. I have no reason to be merciful." Feng Na giggled and waved at Li Yundong. "Then I'm going to class. See you later. Remember to come back in 2 days. You have to come." Li Yundong waved back. "I'll be there." After watching Feng Na go upstairs, he turned around and walked toward the library. Go to Kanban. 7K, O-/ along the way Li Yundong pondered, what can I do in the future? Or, how can I support myself in the future? I can't live off a woman all day long, can I? What the hell? As the saying goes, one's mouth is soft when one is fed, and one's hands are short when one is fed. How could one cultivate if one relied on relief or lived off a woman all day long? Even if I start cultivating, I won't be able to do it. Plus, I still have to support Su-chan in the future. I can't let her suffer with me, can I? I have to find a way to make money. But how can I make money? Li Yundong thought back to his 2 years in university. It was a complete waste of time. Plus, the Chinese department I'm in is *T. I don't even know what kind of job I should find after I graduate. It seems like any job would be suitable for me, but then again, none of them seem to be suitable for me. What the F***ck was going on? Why did I choose the Chinese department back then? It's such a lame major. Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Even a finance major would be good. It would be so much easier to find a job. Li Yundong thought as he walked. From the teaching building to the library, he had to pass through the school field. As soon as he reached the field, he heard a burst of shouting coming from the field. He turned his head and was immediately amused. He saw a group of young students in green uniforms doing military training on the spacious and flat lawn of the field. At this time it was the season of autumn. The sun above their heads was scorching the students on the sports field, making them sweat profusely. Some of them were standing in military postures on the sports field under the scorching sun, some were lifting their legs, and some were learning military boxing from the instructors. As Li Yundong walked across the field, he looked at the new students with a smile on his face. He couldn't help but think of the days when he first entered the school. These students who were in the middle of military training also saw Li Yundong passing through the playground. Some of them recognized him from the forum and whispered to each other, "Hey, is that Li Yundong? Yeah, he doesn't look like the PP in video in the post. Well, he's a little tanned, but I think he's more handsome. Hey, what's that thing he's carrying? Why does it look so heavy? I don't know. Maybe it's a prop he uses to act cool? Act cool? I think it's pretentious, isn't it? Come on, people who have the ability to act cool are called awesome, and some people who don't have the ability to act cool are called idiots. Humph, I don't believe he's that great. In my opinion, it's all bragging." The new students whispered to each other and pointed at Li Yundong. The instructor next to them shouted, "What are you arguing about?" This loud shout shocked the students and made them tremble all over. They withdrew their gazes one after another, not daring to look at Li Yundong again, let alone say a word. One by one they stood obediently. Only a tall and burly boy looked at Li Yundong's back thoughtfully, and his eyes gradually emitted a sharp and excited light. Li Yundong went to the school library to return the books and then borrowed a few more. He didn't want to go to class, so he sat in the reading area and flipped through the books while thinking about a question. What can I do in the future? What skills can I use to make a living and make money? Although cultivation could transcend all living beings, without money, there was no way to solve the problem of eating and drinking. The further Li Yundong walked on the path of cultivation, the more he understood that money wasn't everything when it came to cultivation, but money was absolutely necessary. Li Yundong pulled out a piece of paper and a pen from his bag and wrote down all the skills he knew on it. Then he stared blankly at them one by one. He realized that other than being good at fighting and treating minor illnesses, he really didn't know anything else. What am I supposed to do? What can I do about it? Li Yundong couldn't help but worry. But just as he was worrying, he suddenly heard the crisp sound of a slap coming from the quiet reading room. Li Yundong turned his head and saw a girl crying at a boy. "You bastard! You bastard! How could you break up with me?" As she said this, she waved her fist and punched the boy. Li Yundong took a closer look and suddenly smiled. Hey, isn't this the boy with the peach blossom eyes who was diagnosed by Su Chan as having a deficiency of yin in his kidney? This handsome boy really did look like a magnet for bees and butterflies. He didn't expect that the girl in front of him would act up on the spot and slap him in front of everyone. He was anxious and angry. He covered his cheek with his hand and his face turned purple. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. The girl hysterically cursed and hit him. "Yes, I'm crazy. I'm crazy because I like you, you bastard. I'm going to kill you today." Seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, the handsome boy suddenly felt dizzy. Just like last time when he was with Su Chan, he used his excellent tradition. He couldn't breathe, his eyes rolled back, his mouth crooked, and he passed out. Out of the blue, people always ask me, Tang, how long have you been writing? How many chapters are there in your book? Questions like that. Every time I can only smile bitterly. How would I know? That's right. You're the one who wrote this book. How could you not know? By the way, your life is still your own. Do you know how long you can live? Do you know how long you can live? You don't know either, do you? Unless you kill yourself immediately, you won't be able to answer my questions. Neither will I. Unless I kill myself immediately, I won't be able to answer your questions either. So, please don't ask this kind of question again in the future. Just keep reading. You guys only asked once, but I've been asked countless times. I can't take it anymore. Please, thank you. /OM/ Chapter 209. Go to WatchNet. Although school had just started, there were still many senior students who chose to study in the cool and quiet reading room of the library. WatchNet. 7 KOM. As soon as the handsome man fainted, The students in the reading room all stood up, stretched their necks and looked curiously at the crime scene. Li Yundong glanced at him and found that the handsome man was lying on the ground, twitching and foaming at the mouth. Li Yundong's heart trembled and he walked over. "Out of the way, everyone, out of the way." As soon as Li Yundong took a step forward, a voice rang out. He turned his head and suddenly found that the person who spoke was also an acquaintance. It was Yen Hua, who had followed Ruan Hongling to enter the examination as the top scorer. Yen Hua drove away the onlookers and said, "Everyone, don't crowd around here. It will make it difficult for him to breathe." As he spoke, he turned around and was about to look at the fainted handsome man, but he saw Li Yundong walking toward him. Yen Hua was stunned and frowned inwardly. Why is he here? Li Yundong wanted to check on the beautiful man's condition, but it was very inconvenient for him to carry the fan of 7 treasures on his back. He couldn't even bend down, so he had to untie the fan of 7 treasures and put it aside. Then he squatted down to check on the beautiful man's condition. When the girl next to him saw Li Yundong reaching out to the handsome man, she immediately asked anxiously, "What are you doing?" Li Yundong glanced at her indifferently. Although he didn't say a word, the girl felt a kind of dignified aura coming from him. She was speechless and didn't dare to stop him again. Li Yundong felt the pulse of the beautiful man and frowned secretly. Yen Hua, who was beside him, sneered and said, "You also know medicine?" Yen Hua had been holding back his anger and wanted to compete with Li Yundong. Seeing that Li Yundong's movements didn't seem to be pretending, he couldn't help but ask, "What is the diagnosis of this person's illness?" "What kind of diagnosis?" When Li Yundong heard this, he immediately raised his head and looked at Yen Hua in surprise. "You know traditional Chinese medicine?" TCM was different from Western medicine, which was a precise microscopic science. TCM was a medical science that regulated and adjusted from a macroscopic perspective. To observe and determine a person's illness, one must start from the 4 aspects of look, listen, question, and feel the pulse. Furthermore, several doctors would often diagnose different illnesses, which required medical theory to differentiate. Li Yundong had read a lot of medical books these days, so he naturally understood this. As soon as he heard Yen Hua's words, he knew that this arrogant young man obviously knew Chinese medicine. Watch net. 7KOM. Yen Hua proudly raised his chin. "I don't dare to say that I understand. I only know a little." "Do you dare to argue with me here?" Li Yundong didn't comment. "Oh," he said. He opened the eyelids of the beautiful man, looked at him and said casually, "Why didn't you go to military training?" Yen Hua snorted. "I'm a specially recruited student. I don't need to go to military training. Do you really think I'm a weak bookworm?" Li Yundong glanced at him, smiled slightly and didn't answer. Seeing Li Yundong like this, Yen Hua became angry. He felt that Li Yundong was looking down on him, but he was also a person who thought highly of himself. He thought to himself, "What's so great about you? Why do you look down on me? I look down on you." Yen Hua couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, do you dare to argue with me here?" Li Yundong smiled. He helped the beautiful man up and said to the girl who was wiping her tears, "You hold him." The girl was panicking and at a loss. Subconsciously, she listened to Li Yundong's words and supported the handsome man with her hand. Seeing that Li Yundong didn't answer him, Yen Hua thought that Li Yundong was guilty. He sneered and said, "I don't think you dare. This man's illness is obviously kidney deficiency. I'll prick him with a needle and he'll wake up immediately." A curious student couldn't help but ask, "You also know acupuncture?" Yen Hua said proudly, "Of course." He touched his body casually, and suddenly a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. "But I didn't bring a needle today. Do any of you have a hair clip or something? Can I borrow it?" Immediately, a girl took a hair clip from her head and handed it over. Yen Hua took it and thanked her. "Thank you very much." As he said this, he turned around and was about to show his skills, but he saw Li Yundong's palm pressing on the beautiful man's head, as if he was massaging him. Yen Hua suddenly said angrily, "What are you doing? Get out of the way, don't waste time. You don't even know how to argue. How can you treat people?" As soon as his voice fell, he saw Li Yundong suddenly grab the beautiful man's head with his 5 fingers, as if he had lifted something. In the blink of an eye, the beautiful man snorted and woke up. The surrounding students suddenly burst into an uproar. "He's awake, he's awake." The girl next to him couldn't help crying. She threw herself into the beautiful man's arms, crying and shouting, "I'm sorry, it's my fault. You scared me to death just now." When the beautiful man woke up, he saw the girl in his arms crying, and his heart softened. He said, "It's my fault. I shouldn't have broken up with you. Watch net. Seeing that the two of them had made up, Li Yundong said with a smile, it's all right now. The rain has passed. But I'll have to trouble you to change the place when it rains and thunders. This is not a good place for a sitcom. His words made the students around him laugh. Yen Hua stared at Li Yundong with his mouth agape. He couldn't understand how Li Yundong could make the boy recover just by touching his head with his hand. Could it be that this boy just happened to wake up? Yen Hua thought to himself. When he saw the students around him laughing, his heart suddenly tightened and he thought to himself, what are these people laughing at? Could it be that he was laughing at me for trying to argue with Li Yundong and calling me a nerd? Just now he had chased after Li Yundong to argue with him, but Li Yundong had not answered his words at all. He had cured this person with a wave of his hand. In contrast, he had simply become a bookworm who only knew how to show off his tongue. The more Yen Hua thought about it, the more he felt that these people were laughing at him. He looked at Li Yundong with jealousy, hatred, annoyance and anger. He felt that the exclamations and praises of these people around him should be directed at him, but Li Yundong had forcibly stolen his limelight. Yen Hua had been an excellent student since he was a child. Wherever he went, he was pursued and worshipped by his classmates. He thought that the students of this third-rate university would admire him very much because he was the top scholar, but the truth was the opposite. This damned Li Yundong seemed to have been sent by God to deliberately mess with him, making him appear shallow and childish all the time, just like a nerd. Yen Hua looked at the handsome man coldly and couldn't help but say sarcastically, I advise you to work less when it comes to sex in the future. With your body, if you continue to work like this, I'm afraid it won't be long before you die young. This sentence made the surrounding students burst into laughter. The handsome man's face also turned red, and he was so embarrassed that he couldn't speak. A trace of fear flashed in his eyes. The girls around him also blushed as if they were about to bleed. Secretly, they pinched the flesh of the handsome man's waist with their fingers. Li Yundong patted the handsome man on the shoulder and said, Don't worry, I won't die young. Of course, the handsome man recognized Li Yundong, who was an influential figure. He asked tentatively, Really? Li Yundong nodded and said, Of course. The handsome man's face suddenly brightened up, as if he had taken a tranquilizer. He said to the girl next to him with great joy, You see, I'm so young. It's impossible for me to die young because of this kind of thing. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and said, However, your kidney deficiency is too serious. Your kidney essence is not strong, and your yuanyang is insufficient. Although you won't die young, premature ejaculation is certain. Premature ejaculation. This sentence was even more powerful and shocking than the explosion of a nuclear hydrogen bomb. The students around suddenly stomped their feet and laughed wildly. The handsome man's face suddenly turned as red as a pig's liver, but the girl didn't blush at all. She glared at the boy arrogantly as if to prove that Li Yundong's words were true. Li Yundong smiled. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, the handsome man grabbed him and whispered, Boss, you are too cruel. How can you say that I have premature ejaculation in front of so many people? Do you want me to be a man? Li Yundong said with a serious face, Last semester my girlfriend said that your kidney deficiency is too serious. She told you not to overindulge in sex, but you didn't listen. Now, when you are nervous and excited, you will easily pass out. Do you know why? The handsome man's face turned purple. He shook his head and said, I don't know. Li Yundong said, It's because you have consumed too much essence qi in your body. When you encounter this kind of thing, your qi and blood can't supply, so you will easily pass out. You have to be careful. If you don't pay attention, it will not be a problem of premature ejaculation. It will definitely be a problem of early death. Seeing that Li Yundong was about to leave, the handsome man reached out and grabbed his arm. He begged, Boss, you can't just watch me die. Is there any good medicine that can help me? Li Yundong thought for a moment, put down the fan of 7 treasures, sat down, took out a notebook and pen, and wrote a prescription for strengthening yang and nourishing the kidneys. Then he tore off the paper and handed it to the handsome man, saying, As the saying goes, food is better than medicine, food is better than spiritual nourishment, and spiritual nourishment is better than physical nourishment. Don't be superstitious about these things. The handsome man took the prescription and glanced at it. He said curiously, I've heard that food is better than medicine, but food is better than spiritual nourishment, and spiritual nourishment is better than physical nourishment. What does spiritual nourishment mean? Li Yundong explained, Food is better than spiritual nourishment. It means that you need to calm down every day, clear your mind, and control your desires. Don't be easily irritable. The 7 emotions and 6 desires are very harmful to the body. When your emotions are good, your mood will be good. Once you are in a good mood, it will be more useful than anything you eat. When Wu Zishu passed through Shaoguan, why did his hair turn white overnight? It was because his emotions were filled with fear and panic that his kidney essence was injured. You see, there are already white hairs in your hair, which means that your kidneys have begun to have problems. Be more careful. As Li Yundong spoke, some of the curious students around him also listened attentively and nodded one after another. They felt that Li Yundong's words were very reasonable. Some people even took out pens and quickly wrote down every word Li Yundong said. At this time, the handsome man didn't want to hide his illness for fear of treatment. He asked again, "What does it mean that spiritual nourishment is better than physical nourishment?" Li Yundong said, "It's useless to just have a good mood and eat good food all day long, because people need to exercise more. As the saying goes, life is about exercise. That's the truth. If you are in a good mood all day long and eat good food but don't exercise, it will only create a fat pig and it will not make your body better at all. Therefore, more exercise is the best way to nourish your body." Speaking of this, Li Yundong seemed to think of something and added, "Of course, bed exercise is not exercise, it is a matter of great catharsis. An exercise can't be too vigorous like in the gym, it's not good to work hard and sweat a lot. That's called going too far is as bad as not going far enough. It's best to go out for a walk or jog for dozens of minutes, half an hour to an hour after eating. As the saying goes, walk 100 steps after a meal and live to 99. Li Yundong's words were simple and easy to understand. Not only did the handsome man suddenly understand, but the students around him also understood and looked at Li Yundong with admiration in their eyes. The handsome man carefully hid the prescription and said with a smile, "Boss, I admire you today. With such good medical skills, why don't you become a doctor?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Nowadays, people don't believe in traditional Chinese medicine." The handsome man said, "Then it's all the more reason to promote it." Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat, and a voice in his mind shouted loudly, "That's right, why don't I use my advantage in cultivation to do something related to medical practice? I can make money this way and I can also promote our Chinese culture. Why not?" Last week's flower list was regrettably only ranked 9th, and the 8th place was taken by Xiao Qian. The number of flowers for children's shoes reached a new high, but they were still regrettably defeated, although they were defeated with honor. This week's Tuesday and Saturday, tomorrow's third watch, children's shoes more flowers. /om/ Chapter 210. Go to watch net. It was as if someone in the fog had suddenly pointed him in the right direction. Although the path was still unclear, at least he knew where to go. At least he wouldn't be like a lost person who didn't know where to go. The beautiful man's words made Li Yundong feel as if he had been enlightened all of a sudden. Go to watch net? Net. Super under speed. More? No. After learning from Li Yundong about how to strengthen one's yang and nourish one's kidneys and how to nourish one's body, beautiful man left happily. Li Yundong, on the other hand, understood the direction of his future from beautiful man's words, and walked out of the library with joy in his heart. When he reached the door, he saw the old man in charge of the library. He smiled and nodded to him, then walked out of the door. Yan Hua, who had been looking at Li Yundong with hatred and jealousy, walked up to the old man and asked in surprise, "Grandpa, do you know him?" Yan Hua's grandfather laughed and said, "This is the person I told you about on the phone. What do you think? Are you convinced?" Yan Hua's face was ugly. He shouted, "Why should I be convinced? What's so great about him?" After that, he walked out angrily. Yan Hua's grandfather looked at Yan Hua and shook his head secretly. He sighed in his heart. This boy has been arrogant since he was a child. He is used to being flattered. I'm afraid this time he is going to suffer a big setback. When Li Yundong returned from the original path with the fan of 7 treasures on his back, most of the freshmen on the sports field had already rested. Many of them were resting under the shade of trees. Only one class was still persistently practicing military boxing under the sun. Li Yundong glanced at the class on the way back and found that it was actually a student practicing with an instructor. The other students were watching the scene on the field excitedly and nervously. It was not common for a student to fight an instructor. Li Yundong couldn't help but stop and take a second look. The instructor on the field wasn't very tall, standing at about 1.7 meters. However, his body was lean, his skin was tanned, and his eyes were bright and full of expression. With one look, one could tell that he was a martial artist. The freshman standing in front of him was wearing a camouflage uniform. He looked quite tall and his sleeves were rolled up high. The muscles on his arms were like steel bars, and it was obvious that he was a martial artist of external martial arts. Go to watch net. When the boy saw Li Yundong standing not far away and watching, a trace of excitement suddenly flashed in his eyes. He took a deep breath, leaped forward and punched the instructor like a cannon. As soon as he made his move, Li Yundong secretly frowned. The moment an expert made a move, one would know whether or not he was an expert. Ordinary people would approach their opponents cautiously and observe their opponent's minute flaws while they were still, or they would circle around their opponent and observe their opponent's reaction and footsteps during the movement. From there, they would judge their opponent's agility. If the opponent's footwork was not as nimble as his, then he would walk around the opponent, trying to create an advantageous position where the opponent's back was to his advantage, and then fiercely attack the opponent's back. If the opponent's footwork was more nimble than his, then he would immediately rush forward and engage in hand-to-hand combat, not allowing the opponent to leave his attack range and footwork range. However, the moment the boy punched out, not only did he go straight for the instructor's chest, he didn't even bother to test his strength. Instead, he took a huge leap and his movements were so big that he didn't seem to care about the instructor at all. Moreover, in Li Yundong's opinion, the fact that the boy dared to do such a thing showed that he was indeed capable. His punches were fierce and experienced, and his moves were bold and presumptuous. If Li Yundong hadn't reached the Zhuji phase, it would have been very difficult for him to deal with the boy. The instructor practiced military boxing. Although there were striking techniques in military boxing, most of them focused on capturing and subduing the enemy. When the instructor saw that the student was coming at him aggressively and full of youthful vigor, he calmly took a step back. He grabbed the boy's fist with one hand and grabbed the boy's arm with the other. He leaned his body to the side, not only dodging the boy's fist, but also burrowed his entire body into the boy's chest. His legs dug into the boy's crotch, squeezed and leaned. This move was very exciting. As long as the instructor spun his feet and followed the force just now, he would be able to turn his body to the back of the student. He would immediately be in an advantageous position and be able to subdue the opponent with the cross-lock grappling technique. But just as his legs were about to squeeze the boy's body, he suddenly felt an extremely powerful force coming from the boy. The student in front of him suddenly let out a loud roar and spat out an air cannon from his mouth, causing the instructor's heart to flutter. His body couldn't help but tremble and then his whole body flew up with a whoosh. He actually flew 5 or 6 meters away, heading straight for Li Yundong like a cannonball. Go watch net. 7 KOM. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected that he would be able to see a troublesome matter just by looking at it from the sidelines. He reached out and pressed on the back of the instructor. A gentle force was sent out and the instructor was quietly blocked. The exchange between the student and the instructor was very fast. It could be said that it was as fast as lightning. The surrounding students only saw a blur before the instructor was sent flying. It was like a scene in a kung fu movie where the instructor was suspended on a wire. Wow! The freshmen immediately burst into an uproar. Some of them who knew the student immediately shouted excitedly, "Fengji, you're awesome!" In the eyes of the freshmen, the instructors were lofty existences that could not be offended. However, Fengji, who was also a freshman like them, had actually sent the instructor flying in an extremely exaggerated manner. This immediately caused them to be astonished by Fengji. Some of the students in the dormitory who knew Fengji more or less began to brag about him with pride. Now you know how awesome Brother Feng is, right? You have to know that Brother Feng is the national martial arts champion. Are you serious? Why did the national martial arts champion come to our school? Why didn't he go to the sports school? Well, how would I know? But I heard that he's a specially enrolled student. After the instructor who had been sent flying stopped in his tracks, he looked back to see who had caught him. After seeing that it was also a student of this school, he was immediately stunned. He muttered to himself, "I felt like I had hit a wall just now. My opponent's hand was soft and strong and I wasn't hurt at all. Obviously he's also a master. When did Tiannan University become so crouching tigers and hidden dragons?" As he thought about it, he laughed self-deprecatingly. "Thank you so much. I didn't expect to embarrass myself so much today." Li Yundong smiled and said, "He has been practicing martial arts for many years. It's normal for him to lose." The instructor looked at Li Yundong. He saw that the boy in front of him was standing like a pine tree. Although his aura was extremely strong, he didn't give off an aggressive feeling like Feng Ji. Instead, he gave off a strong impression. The instructor asked curiously, "Are you also a martial artist?" Ever since Li Yundong had started practicing Shintong in the Zhuji phase, his powerful aura, which he couldn't restrain, had all been refined into the Jinqi of the Niden and stored in the lower dantian of his lower abdomen. Li Yundong's aggressive heroic spirit had also become restrained from the outside. He was no longer like before, where he would stab people of the same gender wherever he went. Li Yundong smiled at the instructor and said, "I guess so." As he said this, he subconsciously glanced at Feng Ji. Feng Ji, who was surrounded by these freshmen like stars surrounding the moon, also happened to look up at Li Yundong. Like an intruder who had just stepped into someone else's territory, he raised his chin and gave Li Yundong a provocative look. If it had been in the past, with Li Yundong's irritable character, he might have immediately greeted him with a sneer. But now, Li Yundong had succeeded in the Zhuji phase and his Shintong had appeared for the first time. His temperament had also changed, gradually becoming deep and tolerant. The sky accommodates all things and the sea accommodates all rivers. It was impossible for people to kick or bite a dog to death just because they saw it barking at them on the side of the road. Because people knew that they were a level higher than this kind of vicious dog. Humans were the wisest of all things. It was the same for cultivators. When Li Yundong faced Feng Ji's provocation, he suddenly found that he was not shocked or angry nor anxious. Instead, he felt a sense of condescension in his heart. At this moment, Li Yundong knew that deep in his heart, he had begun to completely accept the fact that he was a cultivator. He was stronger and more detached than most people in the world. He was a dignified cultivator with divine powers. Why would he bother with a freshman? In the face of Feng Ji's provocation, Li Yundong just smiled slightly. Like a breeze blowing on his face, he turned around and walked away, his figure elegant and calm. The instructor, who was much more mature than the students, looked at Li Yundong's back and secretly praised him. They knew that only a person who had really experienced storms and seen through the world could be so calm from behind. Only a truly powerful person could have such a gentle and tolerant smile. Li Yundong walked away freely, but the freshmen didn't think so. In their opinion, Li Yundong, who was very famous in the school, had obviously retreated in the face of the challenge of a freshman. The freshmen were always in awe of the older students. They came to the university with uneasiness, fresh curiosity, and some ambition. As freshmen who had just been released from the cage of high school, deep in their hearts was a soul that longed to show itself. They longed to perform and to be in the limelight, especially when they found that there was a freshman like them around them who was strong enough to challenge the authority of the most legendary figure in the school. The restlessness and rebellion in their hearts all broke out in an instant. Humph, what legendary figure. I think he's a coward. That's right. He walked away so arrogantly. What's so great about him? Hey, you don't understand. He's smart. What's the benefit of fighting with you here? If you win, people will say that you bully the freshmen. If you lose, it's even worse. You'll lose everything. This is called shrewdness. Do you understand? Humph, I saw the posts on the forum praising him so much that I thought he was very awesome. I didn't expect that he was also a wily old fox. I despise him. Are you qualified to despise him? Who do you think you are? Only our brother Feng is qualified. Humph, flatterer. The students whispered to each other, while Feng Ji stood still and stared at Li Yundong's back. He was like a young lion, his eyes sharp and threatening. He clenched his fists so hard that they made cracking sounds, like beans being fried, which made people's hair stand on end. If you don't throw flowers while reading, be careful that you die young. That's right. /OM/. Chapter 211. Go to watch net. After class, Li Yundong headed to the cafeteria for lunch as usual. While he was waiting in line, he heard Feng Na calling out to him from behind. Li Yundong. Li Yundong turned his head and greeted her with a smile. Watch net. Color *** literature _learning % super #speed. Update. The two of them took the dishes and sat down at the table. Feng Na smiled and said, "By the way, I forgot to tell you something this morning." While eating, Li Yundong asked, "What's the matter?" Feng Na noticed that he was chewing carefully and swallowing slowly. He took a long time to chew each mouthful of rice before swallowing it slowly. His movements were so gentle that he didn't look like a man at all. She asked curiously, "When did you become so gentle when you eat?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Only then did he realize that he had completely integrated into the role of a cultivator. While eating, he subconsciously remembered what Ziyuan had said. He smiled and asked Feng Na what Ziyuan had once said, "Tell me, why do people have to chew slowly? Are you afraid that you won't be able to digest it?" Feng Na said with a smile as she tucked her hair behind her ear. Li Yundong nodded and said with a smile, "That's right, but why can't you digest it? When food enters the stomach, it will be digested sooner or later." Feng Na said, "Chew it more carefully. It's better for the stomach to digest and the duodenum to absorb." Li Yundong raised a finger and said, "You're only right about one thing. Come, let me ask you again, how does the stomach digest food and how does the intestine digest food?" Feng Na said without hesitation, "You don't know? It relies on the gastric juice and the peristalsis of the gastric pouch and intestines." Li Yundong nodded and said, "Yes, gastric juice can dissolve part of the food, and then digest it through the friction and extrusion of the gastric sac. The same is true for the intestines. But do you know what the stomach works on?" Feng Na thought for a moment and said, "Gastric drive?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "You've watched too many commercials." Feng Na smiled and asked, "What's that?" She tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then her eyes lit up and she said, "Yes, I know. It's blood?" Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right. Do you know what blood relies on to move?" She shook her head and said, "I don't know. Watch net." Li Yundong said, "It's qi. As the saying goes, qi in blood, qi is the commander of blood. A commander without qi would have nowhere to go. Sometimes people suffer from high blood pressure, heart disease and other diseases. Most of the time, it's because of a sudden shortness of breath, and blood can't be pumped up, which leads to a sudden attack." Feng Na suddenly said, "Oh, so that's how it is. But does this have anything to do with chewing carefully and swallowing slowly?" Li Yundong still didn't answer her question. Instead he asked, "How long can you take a breath?" As he spoke, he demonstrated the action of taking a breath himself. Feng Na followed suit and inhaled until she could no longer inhale. Then she exhaled. Li Yundong asked with a smile, "Can you inhale endlessly?" Feng Na smiled and said, "How is that possible? Humans can't breathe endlessly." Li Yundong nodded and said, "That's right. So no matter what a person does, his qi is limited. Your breathing is like this and so is the qi in your body. When you eat, if the food you chew is coarser, your stomach will have to use more strength to digest it. If your stomach wants to exert strength, it will have to consume more blood and qi. You consume more here so you use less in other places. And a person's qi is limited. This is called robbing Peter to pay Paul. Many people eat voraciously when they are young, but when they get old, their stomachs have problems. That's the reason." Feng Na widened her eyes and looked at Li Yundong in surprise. She was speechless for a long time. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What's wrong? Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Feng Na made an obeisance by cupping her hands and said with admiration, "Well, Zhenren Li, I really admire you today. You are becoming more and more like a Zhenren. In the past, when Su Chan taught people a lesson in public, she said that her medical skills were taught by you. At that time I was doubtful, but now I'm sure." As she spoke, Feng Na stretched out her palm in front of Li Yundong and said with a smile, "Come on, Zhenren Li, let me see a doctor." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Are you going to see a doctor? Why do I see that you want to have your fortune told?" Feng Na giggled, rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "Then it's good to have my fortune told." Li Yundong pointed at Feng Na and said with a smile, "Which mountain are you going to worship? You're not sincere at all." But he still pretended to be serious and said, "Do you want to have your career or your marriage read?" Feng Na smiled and said, "Both?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Benefactor, you are too greedy. You are like a snake trying to swallow an elephant. This kind of insincerity won't work." Feng Na curled her lips and said, "Humph, I think it's because you, a fake Taoist and a real fraud, are not strong enough." This sentence really hit Li Yundong's weak spot. He really didn't know anything about fortune-telling. Li Yundong coughed dryly and changed the topic. "What did you want to talk to me about just now? Tell me first." Feng Na slapped her forehead and said, "Look, I was so confused by your nonsense that I almost forgot." Li Yundong was chewing slowly when he almost spat out a mouthful of rice. "Hey, benefactor, can you pay attention to your wording when you speak?" When Feng Na saw the students around them lowering their heads and snickering, her cheeks turned red, but she refused to admit defeat and said, "It's your own imagination." Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, Don't talk nonsense. Tell me what's the matter. She giggled and said, actually, it's nothing. It's just that there's a welcome party in a few days and I want you to join us for a rehearsal. Watch net. Li Yundong immediately waved his hand. No. You haven't become the president of the student union yet. Why should I go? Didn't we agree that I would only go if you became the president? Feng Na smiled slyly. I will definitely become the president. Don't worry. If you don't come to rehearse, I'm afraid that you will have stage fright when the time comes. Li Yundong laughed. Are you kidding me? I won't have stage fright even if you have stage fright. Feng Na cupped her hands and begged, just do me a favor please. Although most of the performances in the welcome party are for the freshmen, the older students will also have performances. If our performance is too lousy, we will be laughed at. Li Yundong was most afraid of being begged by beautiful girls like this, especially girls who were close to him. He rubbed his forehead and said helplessly, hey, tell me what I want to do first. Feng Na giggled. We want to rehearse a short play? Li Yundong said curiously, oh? That's new. What do you rehearse? Feng Na smiled proudly. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy that I personally choreographed. Li Yundong gasped. Wow. How many hours do you want the audience to watch? That's a bit long. How many generations? Don't tell me it's going to be a lousy work like the second and third generations. Feng Na laughed. Of course it's one generation. Only one generation is the most classic. And it's just one scene. Li Yundong laughed. That's more like it. What scene? Feng Na laughed. The scene where the sword sage takes Zhao Linger away. Then who should I play? Li Yundong asked curiously. As soon as he finished speaking, he became alert. Don't tell me I'm going to play Li Xiaoyao. Feng Na giggled. This is your family. Isn't it better for you to play Li Xiaoyao? Li Yundong shook his head like a rattle drum. No, Li Xiaoyao is such a good for nothing. His wife was kidnapped and his lover was killed as well. In the end he ended up alone and miserable. He's too useless, too miserable. I'm not going to play him. It's inauspicious. Li Yundong shook his head like a rattle drum. Feng Na snorted. You can't play it even if you want to. This role has long been played by someone else. Li Yundong was relieved. That's good. Who should I play? Feng Na snapped her fingers and said, who else could it be? With your skills and spirit, of course it's the sword sage. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He pointed a finger at his nose. Me, the sword sage? Does that count as a cameo? Feng Na laughed. If it's not a cameo, then what is it? Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You can find anyone to play the role. Feng Na shook her head and said, no, in the whole school, I can see that you are the only one who has the transcendent, aloof and cold temperament of the sword sage. This kind of temperament can't be acted out. Even the other professionals in the film and performance department don't have this kind of temperament. So, this role must be played by you. Li Yundong touched his cheek and pretended to stroke his beard. He coughed dryly and said, am I so outstanding? Feng Na kept a straight face and said seriously, you don't have to doubt that I was just flattering you. After that, she burst out laughing. Li Yundong didn't get angry when he heard this. Instead, he laughed out loud. While he was laughing, he suddenly heard a voice behind him. Li Yundong? Li Yundong turned his head and saw Feng Ji, who he had met once before, standing in front of him, looking at him with bright eyes. He stood in a straight line with his knees slightly bent, like a cheetah that would pounce and eat people at any time. Li Yundong frowned secretly and asked, what can I do for you? Feng Ji cupped his hands to Li Yundong and said, I heard that your kung fu is good, so I want to compete with you. Li Yundong smiled and said, that's a misconception. I haven't learned kung fu. After that, he turned around and didn't want to talk to the boy. What he said was true. Li Yundong really hadn't learned kung fu from anyone for a day. What he had learned was the way of cultivation. He had used the method of external alchemy to strengthen his body, and then entered the Tao with the method of Naiden. It had nothing to do with kung fu at all. However, Feng Ji didn't believe his words at all. Seeing that Li Yundong had turned around and ignored him, he suddenly became furious, thinking that Li Yundong was looking down on him. He glanced around and saw that most of the students around him were focused on him, especially the freshmen who regarded him as a celestial being. Feng Ji sneered and shouted in a low voice, then I'll have to offend you. After that, he jumped up and grabbed Li Yundong's shoulder with his fingers like hooks. /OM/ Chapter 212. King. Calm. As soon as Feng Ji made his move, Feng Na, who was sitting opposite him, stood up in shock. She saw that Feng Ji's fingers were strong and powerful, grabbing Li Yundong's shoulder like hard iron hooks. She screamed, "Watch out!" Even Feng Na could react, so how could Li Yundong not? He turned sideways and Feng Ji's fingers grabbed the fan of 7 treasures on his back. King. Calm. 7 KOM. Color *** literature _learning % super #speed. Feng Ji only felt that his tentacles were hard, and there was a faint sound of hitting steel. He was surprised and wondering what on earth Li Yundong was carrying on his back when he suddenly saw a burst of light coming from the cloth bag Li Yundong was carrying on his back. Li Yundong's heart suddenly skipped a beat, and he cursed inwardly, "The fan of 7 treasures has come out to protect its master." In an instant, the cloth behind Li Yundong tore apart with a tearing sound, and the fan of 7 treasures, which was nearly as tall as a man, instantly cut the cloth, wrapping it into countless pieces. It suddenly jumped out of the restraint, and the fan's leaves opened with a swoosh, like a peacock spreading its tail. The fan's leaves rubbed against each other, making the clanging sound of iron. The students in the cafeteria suddenly felt a strong murderous aura coming at them, making them almost unable to breathe. It was as if they had suddenly been placed in an ancient battlefield, surrounded by strong winds. The wind was mixed with the terrible sound of iron rubbing against each other, as if countless soldiers were continuously pulling out their swords and sabers from their waists. After the fan of 7 treasures opened in an instant, its fan's leaves automatically flew at a high speed. Golden Sanskrit characters suddenly burned and jumped up, surrounding the fan of 7 treasures, looking dazzling and solemn. The students around were already dumbfounded, and even Feng Ji was so shocked that he couldn't wrap his head around it. What is this? After the fan of 7 treasures rotated at a high speed, it didn't stop at all and slashed toward Feng Ji. Li Yundong was shocked. He knew that if the fan of 7 treasures hit Feng Ji, he would immediately become a mass of flesh and blood. Being hit by the edge of the fan of 7 treasures rotating at high speed was no different from being hit by an electric saw. In the blink of an eye, Li Yundong moved like lightning and accurately pinched the tail of the fan of 7 treasures. He lowered his waist and exerted his strength fiercely, trying to stop the fan from slashing forward. Seeing that the edge of the fan was about to hit Feng Ji, he let out a loud shout, turned his waist and spun his feet. He suddenly changed the force of the straight slash into a diagonal slash. The psychic fan of 7 treasures brushed past Feng Ji's cheek and shoulder and slashed over. Watch net. Feng Ji only felt a gust of wind whistling past his ears as if countless swords and sabers were slashing down from beside him. He was so frightened that he didn't dare to make any movements, fearing that he would be chopped into pieces if he moved even a little. After Li Yundong changed the direction of the fan of 7 treasures, he spun his feet again and twisted his waist fiercely. Taking advantage of the falling force of the fan of 7 treasures, he forcefully swung the fan backward. Then, with the movement of swinging the fan, he forcibly closed all the fan leaves with a swoosh. From the slash of the fan of 7 treasures to Li Yundong's grasp, twist, and swing, these lightning-fast moves were so fast that no one could see them clearly. There were even residual shadows of the burning golden characters in the air, like the effects of a special effect in a movie. It was dazzling and shocking. After the last sound of the fan blades rubbing against each other, all the people in the cafeteria suddenly felt that the whistling sound in the air had disappeared in the blink of an eye, and the residual shadows of the burning golden characters in the air also slowly disappeared. They all sat or stood, staring at Li Yundong blankly, unable to say a word, as if they had all been frozen in place. It wasn't until Li Yundong slammed the fan of 7 treasures on the ground with a thud, causing their bodies to shake and their feet to go numb, that they came to their senses as if they had just woken up from a dream. Feng Ji looked at Li Yundong in astonishment. His eyes widened and his eyeballs almost fell out of their sockets. He stammered, Who the hell are you?" Li Yundong looked at Feng Ji with unkind eyes, and he was furious in his heart. Although his temperament was slowly becoming calm and tolerant, it didn't mean that he could tolerate things to a certain extent, especially just now. If he hadn't acted quickly, Feng Ji would have been automatically killed by the fan of 7 treasures. It didn't matter if he died, but he had used a magical item to kill someone before he had passed the heavenly tribulation. Wouldn't a bolt of lightning strike him immediately? If he died, what would happen to Su Chan? Li Yundong snorted coldly. His voice was so dull that it sounded like a clap of thunder in the clouds. Everyone in the cafeteria felt a sharp pain in their chests, as if someone had punched them. As a freshman, I think it's better for you to behave yourself. Don't overestimate yourself. After that, he didn't even have the mood to eat. He carried the fan of 7 treasures and strode out. Watch net. 7K, for a moment, the cafeteria was frighteningly quiet. Although it was full of people, there was not even a cough. Everyone's eyes were fixed on Li Yundong. It was not until he left that the cafeteria became lively again. The students were in an uproar. F***ck, what happened just now? Too awesome, too shocking, it's like watching a computer CG, too strong. So he's been carrying a huge black iron fan on his back all this time. F***ck, Don also used this in Fortress Besieged in October. However, the iron fan he used was simply tragic compared to the one Li Yundong was using. It's so lame. F***ck, the ground was smashed by this iron fan. How heavy is this fan? I guess it's at least dozens or hundreds of kilograms, right? It looks like it's made of pure steel. Strong, it's too strong. The students were talking excitedly, but suddenly, there was an ear-piercing crack on the table next to Feng Ji, who was in a daze. Then, with a bang, the stone table made of marble suddenly broke into 2 pieces and collapsed. The cafeteria was quiet again in an instant, and then in a few seconds it was boiling again. The roof of the cafeteria was almost blown off. F***ck, that's too much. What's going on? F***ck, it seems that the blades of the iron fan were cut off when it was spinning like a wheel. F***ck, this is even more exaggerated than in the movies. The seniors were discussing excitedly, and the freshmen were all dumbfounded, unable to believe their eyes. Some of them finally understood why the seniors in this school worshipped Li Yundong like a god and regarded him as a unique legendary figure in the school. It turns out that he's really a legendary figure. F***ck, that was too exaggerated, wasn't it? F***ck, I said bad things about him. I offended him. I won't be finished after 4 years in college, will I? Should I transfer to another school? As the freshmen were talking, the seniors took the opportunity to give them advice. You are young and ignorant. Jinren Li won't argue with you. Jinren Li? Yes, don't you know that Li Yundong has a sect in this school? What? Li Yundong has a sect here? What sect? I want to join. The Divine Fist sect. Benefactor, do you want to join? It's very simple. As long as you fill in this form and pay the entrance fee of 200 yuan, you can become an apprentice of Jinren Li. At that time we will all be brothers. Your parents will be my parents, your brothers will be my brothers, and your wife will be my wife. F***ck off, monk. Jinren Li is a Taoist master. You monk, get out of here. What Divine Fist sect? Didn't you hear at the school gate last time that there was a Divine Fist sect in this world? And it's in Kowloon, Hong Kong. People might sue you for infringement. Ahem, fellow Taoist, don't listen to that monk's nonsense. I am the chief disciple of Jinren Li. I have full authority to accept disciples on behalf of Jinren Li. May I ask, do I have to pay the entrance fee? Of course not. Our sect doesn't need to pay any entrance fee. You just need to give out a PP and report your 3 measurements before joining. Well, my 3 measurements are 36D, 25, 36. Can I join? What? 36D? Yes. Of course there is milk, ahem, big. I'm 32B, 25, 34. Can I join? What? 32B, no. Boy, you'd better drink more papaya milk tea. Look at you, you're as thin as a pencil. Why not? I protest. You're judging people by their breasts. You're discriminating. You're not respecting human rights. Student, flat-chested people have no human rights. Next. F***ck pervert, what's your name? How dare you flirt with a girl in public? I'm Li. Benefactor, what do you want to do? Beware of the many Christian brothers behind me, or Allah will punish you. F***ck, you don't even know which religion you belong to. No wonder you were locked up. How did you get out? Brothers, catch him and send him to the police station. The cafeteria was a mess of porridge. Feng Na glanced at the dumbfounded Feng Ji, then grabbed her bag and chased after Li Yundong. Hey, wait for me. Feng Na chased after him and ran a few steps. She had just finished her meal and was panting a little after running for a few steps. Li Yundong stopped, turned around and looked at her. He said helplessly, Miss, what can I do for you? Feng Na said, tomorrow afternoon, there will be a rehearsal in the school auditorium. Remember to come. Li Yundong said with a wry smile, are you sure you want me? Forget it, I'm afraid of you. I'll go. Only then did Feng Na feel relieved. She smiled and said, I know you're a gentleman. You never go back on your word. Li Yundong waved his hand and said, all right, don't flatter me. I'll do what I promised you. With that, he turned around and left with the fan of 7 treasures. Feng Na stood rooted to the spot, staring blankly at Li Yundong's receding figure. She didn't know why, but she suddenly had a feeling in her heart that she had never known or understood the boy in front of her. Ever since she first saw him in the Taekwondo club, he had been slowly drifting away from her, away from the familiar world around her. Feng Na thought of the shocking scene that had happened in the canteen and couldn't help but sigh. /om/ Chapter 213. Go to the internet? After Li Yundong left the cafeteria, Feng Ji, who was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a long time, came to his senses. Ignoring the noisy students around him, he took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. He whispered, Shixiang, I'm no match for him. Well, this guy seems to be an inner disciple. Well, I see. After hanging up the phone, Feng Ji's eyes flickered for a while, and then he left the cafeteria. Go to the internet. 7 At the same time, when Li Yundong caused another big trouble in the school cafeteria, Su Chan had already returned to the foot of the mountain of the Fox Zen School with her master. Su Chan clearly remembered that she had left the sect for as long as she could remember. She only vaguely remembered that there were several Shibwa and Shiji in the sect, but she couldn't remember their appearances and figures clearly. Su Chan knew that she was the youngest junior of the Fox Zen School. This time she was afraid that she would have to call everyone elder or senior. She couldn't help but feel a little timid. She hid behind Ao Wushuang and didn't dare to come out. Although Ao Wushuang knew what her disciple was thinking, she was not in the mood to coax her. When she thought that her sect was about to be in trouble, she was very anxious. When she reached the top of the mountain, she rushed all the way to the mountainside. Not all the temples and Taoist temples in the world were built on the top of the mountain. Most of them were built on the mountainside. Ao Wushuang walked quickly all the way. The dense jungle around her was blooming with flowers. Many tourists stopped to watch on the Bluestone Road, but she was not interested in looking at them. The little fox also followed her step by step. Her eyes were rolling and she looked around curiously and timidly. In her impression, these things seemed to be very familiar but also very strange. Halfway up the mountain, a corner of a Taoist gate was faintly revealed in the dense forest. When Ao Wushuang saw it, she immediately became spirited and went up to greet it. Su Chan had always felt very strange. In her opinion, her sect was called the Fox Zen School. Since it had the word Zen in it, and the sect was established under the guidance of Zen Master Baizhang, and her grandmaster had mostly practiced Buddhist cultivation methods back then, why had her sect become a Taoist sect now? Su Chan had thought about this question before, but every time she asked, Ao Wushuang would always say, you're still young. You don't understand these things until you grow up. To watch the net. 7 Color ** literature _learning %super #fast. Now, Su Chan couldn't help but tug at the corner of Ao Wushuang's clothes and ask, Master, shouldn't our Fox Zen school belong to the Buddhist school? Why do you live in a Taoist temple? Ao Wushuang patted Su Chan's hand, which was holding the corner of her clothes, and said, It's a long story. I'll tell you later. Su Chan couldn't help pouting and muttering in a low voice, I knew it would be this sentence again. Ao Wushuang ignored her and knocked on the door. After a while, the wooden door opened with a creak. A beautiful Taoist nun walked out from the left and right side of the door. When the Taoist nun saw Ao Wushuang, she was stunned. What can I do for you? Ao Wushuang glanced at her and walked inside. Where is Lu Yi? Go and tell him that I'm back. When the Taoist nun saw that Ao Wushuang had not announced her name and had directly called her leader by his name, as well as barging in without permission, she was shocked and angry. She blocked her way and said coldly, Who are you? Tell me your name. Ao Wushuang looked the Taoist nun up and down and saw that she didn't look like a fox spirit. Moreover, the red pill in her body had been broken and she had lost her virginity. She was wearing a Taoist robe, but her face was covered with heavy makeup. She was dressed in a coquettish manner and had changed into fashionable clothes. Ao Wushuang knew that she must be an outer disciple. She immediately sneered and said, You, an outer disciple, don't deserve to know my name. The Taoist nun sneered and retorted, It's true that I'm an outer disciple, but who do you think you are? How dare you break into the Taoist mansion? How dare you? Ao Wushuang raised her head and laughed. I can come and go as I please. It was the same 10 years ago and it's the same now. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Hurry up and get out of my way. After that, Ao Wushuang flicked her sleeve and a strong wind blew past. The Taoist nun flew a few meters away and hit the wall. Then she slowly slid down like a picture. Although Ao Wushuang's move looked fierce, in fact she used a strong and gentle force. She put the Taoist nun on the wall but let her fall slowly. She was not injured, showing her excellent kung fu. Go and look at the net. However, as an outer disciple, the Taoist nun didn't know the trick at all. She immediately shouted, "Someone is here. Someone is trespassing and beating people." As soon as she finished shouting, a dozen Taoist nuns in Taoist robes rushed out of the Taoist temple. Some were holding horsetail whisks, some were holding long swords, and some were holding ame daggers. They surrounded Ao Wushuang, and one of them shouted angrily, "Who dares to be so arrogant here? Are you tired of living?" Ao Wushuang glanced at these people coldly. She didn't take them seriously at all. She sneered and said, "A group of people who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Who is your master? Shout out, lest you say that I'm bullying the weak later." When the Taoist nun who had been released by Ao Wushuang saw that many of her companions had come, she felt confident and said arrogantly, "I think you are the one who doesn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Do you know what kind of place this is? Tell me your name lest you say that we are bullying the weak later." Ao Wushuang raised her head and laughed arrogantly. "Do you think you can win by bullying the weak with more people? Do you think you are in a club? It's ridiculous. Choner, go up and teach them a lesson. Otherwise, when someone comes later, they will say that I'm bullying the weak." Su Chan had always been a bold and heartless person. At this time, with the support of her master, she immediately giggled and replied crisply, "Yes, master." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure instantly turned into a wisp of green smoke and rushed toward the Taoist nuns. The Taoist nuns only felt their vision blur, and then their hands went numb. The weapons in their hands fell unconsciously, but they didn't fall to the ground. In the blink of an eye, they were taken away by Su Chan. By the time they reacted, Su Chan had already returned to Ao Wushuang's side. She was holding a lot of horsetail whisks, long swords, ame thorns, and other instruments in her hands, looking at them with a smile. The Taoist nuns were shocked and angry. They stood where they were and were disarmed before they could resist. They shouted angrily, "Damn it, what's going on? F***ck your grandmother, what's the point of sneak attack? Hey, give me back my weapons. You little bitch, if you have the ability, come here openly." They cursed for a while and Ao Wushuang frowned. She rolled up her sleeves and shouted angrily, "A group of bastards, what did your master teach you? Today, I may have to teach you a good lesson on behalf of your master." When the Taoist nuns who had been released by Ao Wushuang saw that Ao Wushuang and her disciples were powerful, they immediately sat on the ground and began to scold like a shrew. "Come on, someone is bullying us. They're going to kill us. They're going to kill us." Ao Wushuang was so angry that smoke was coming out of her 7 orifices. She thought to herself, "I haven't been back to the sect for 10 years. Why has it become a place to hide evil? What's wrong with the leader?" Su Chan also widened her eyes and thought to herself, "Is this how my fellow disciples are? It can't be, right? This is clearly a group of shrews." Just as the two of them were stunned, they suddenly saw a figure flying quickly from the mountain. A blue light flashed and a figure stood in the Taoist courtyard. This person was about 1.78 meters tall with a bun on his head. He was dressed in a Taoist robe and carried a sword on his back. He had an extraordinary temperament and an immortal aura. When the Taoist nuns saw this person appear, they all went up to him with joy and shouted, "Master, a bad person is bullying us. Sherbua, you have to stand up for us." When the Taoist saw so many women rushing towards him, he immediately showed a distressed and happy expression. "Oh, my little girls, what's going on?" The Taoist nuns pointed their fingers at Ao Wushuang and said, "It's her. She's bullying us." Then they pointed at Su Chan and said, "And her. She stole our weapons." The Taoist looked in the direction of the finger and was shocked. "Ao Wushuang? Why are you back?" His gaze fell on Su Chan, and there was a burst of strange and greedy light in his eyes. He said in surprise, "Is this Su Chan?" Su Chan felt uncomfortable being stared at by the Taoist priest and subconsciously shrank behind Ao Wushuang. The Taoist priest showed a kind expression and said to Su Chan, "The last time I saw you, you were still a little girl. I didn't expect you to become so big now." Su Chan asked Ao Wushuang in a low voice, "Master, who is he?" Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "You have to remember that this is the most useless second Sherbua of our Fox Zen school, Gu Feng." Gu Feng smiled bitterly and said, "Little Shimmy, I haven't seen you for 10 years, but you haven't changed at all. Your mouth is still so unforgiving." Ao Wushuang snorted coldly and said, "You haven't changed at all, have you? You're still so greedy and lecherous." A trace of anger flashed through Gu Feng's eyes, but he was still smiling. "Why do you say that?" Ao Wushuang glanced at the stunned Taoist nuns and said, "What's wrong with these people? How did you discipline your disciple?" As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a cold snort. "My disciple is also here. Why, little Shimmy, do you want to teach me a lesson too?" Ao Wushuang looked around and saw a beautiful young woman in a Taoist robe with a sawtooth iron wheel on her back. She immediately frowned and said to Su Chan, "This is your 7th Sherbua, Yiyu." After that, she said coldly to Yiyu, "7th Sherbua, how have you been?" Although Yiyu was actually quite old, she looked no different from a 17 or 18-year-old girl. She had a fiery temper and was extremely protective. She snorted coldly and said angrily, "Ao Wushuang, don't be hypocritical. You haven't come back for 10 years and caused such a big trouble outside. It's fine if you harm our sect, but as soon as you come back, you bully my disciple. What do you mean? Do you still have me in your eyes?" After that, Yiyu looked at Su Chan and sneered. "You did it just now, didn't you? Very good, very good. Come here and let me see how much of your master's skills you have learned." Su Chan was shocked and quickly shrank behind Ao Wushuang. Ao Wushuang quietly blocked Su Chan behind her and sneered. "Shiji, what's the point of bullying a junior?" Yiyu sneered and said, "Didn't you just bully my disciple? Get out of the way or I'll beat you up too. You were no match for me 10 years ago. Do you think I'm afraid of you now?" Ao Wushuang sneered. The 3-foot-long Bahuang sword hidden behind her jumped out with a clang and automatically surrounded Ao Wushuang as if to protect its master. It let out a sword cry like a dragon's roar. For a moment, the sword chi in the courtyard was everywhere, and the wind was blowing. When Yiyu saw the Bahuang sword, she was shocked and angry. "He actually gave this sword to you. Well, you really colluded with the Jingyi school. No wonder Yen Fang of the Linggong sect came to ask for a punitive expedition 9 years ago. Tell me, did you deliberately lead these disasters to the sect?" After she finished speaking, the chainsaw Vajra wheel behind her jumped out and rotated quickly. It also let out a harsh and sharp buzzing sound, provoking the Bahuang sword not to be outdone. For a moment, these two treasures were challenging each other in the air. The sword chi in the Taoist Academy soared into the sky and was full of murderous intent. Su Chan looked at the field with a dumbfounded expression and said in her heart, "No way, as soon as he came back, he actually started fighting by himself? Is there a mistake? /om/" Chapter 214. Go to watch net. Ao Wushuang was the youngest Shimmy of the Fox Zen school. She was the youngest of the older generation, but she had the highest aptitude and the highest spiritual energy. She was the top master of the Fox Zen school. Watch net. 7 KOM. In addition, she had been arrogant and rebellious since she was a child. She had once risked universal condemnation and fell in love with the leader of the Linggong sect of the Jingyi school. Because of this, she had fallen out with all her fellow disciples and was expelled from the sect 10 years ago. 10 years later, when she came back, she had caused a lot of trouble. The other people in the sect naturally had a lot of ideas about her. As the second most powerful master of the Fox Zen school, Yiyu was even more upset. When Ao Wushuang was not there, she was the #1 master and everyone had to look up to her. But when Ao Wushuang came back, she was going to be the second. Who could stand it? Ao Wushuang had always been indifferent to everyone in the sect. She was as cold as ice, even to her Shiji. Yiyu felt that Ao Wushuang was arrogant because of her talent. She looked down on her Shiji just because her spiritual power was higher than hers. Therefore, she had always been holding back her anger in her heart and wanted to surpass Ao Wushuang. Now that there was such a good opportunity, how could Yiyu let it go? She was furious and immediately threw the danger of the enemy to the back of her mind. She would solve her personal grievances first. Seeing that a fight was about to break out, Su Chan subconsciously shouted, "Don't fight." As soon as she said that, everyone's eyes immediately turned to her. Yiyu sneered and said, "Who do you think you are? Is it your turn to speak here?" Yiyu was very protective, but Ao Wushuang was even more protective than her. Ao Wushuang sneered and said, "She is my disciple. Why can't she speak?" Yi was furious. She pointed her finger, and the chainsaw Vajra suddenly buzzed loudly. The surrounding air was trembling and the sand and stones on the ground were flying. The momentum was terrifying. Ao Wushuang snorted coldly, and the Bahuang sword around her suddenly flew into the air with a swoosh. It looked down at the chainsaw Vajra from above. The sword edge trembled, and in an instant, it split from one sword into two, two into four, and four into eight. In a short time, it turned into a steel lotus throne made entirely of sword edges. The lotus leaves were turning one by one, like countless sawteeth, which was very frightening. Seeing that the two of them were about to fight in the next second, an extremely gentle voice suddenly rang out, flowing through everyone's hearts like a clear spring. "Sigh, we're all from the same sect, why do we have to fight each other?" Everyone looked in the direction of the voice and saw a woman in a white Taoist robe with a transparent gauze draped over her shoulders slowly descending from the sky. This woman was extremely beautiful. Her black hair was slanted, and there was a golden hairpin in her black hair. Although she was also a member of the Fox Zen school, she was beautiful and dignified, like a bodhisattva standing on the ground. Her face was solemn and dignified, which made people respect her. "Go to see." As soon as Yi Yu saw the woman, she immediately stopped and nodded to her. "Eldest Shiji." Su Chan stared at the woman and couldn't help asking Ao Wushuang in a low voice, "Master, is this eldest Shiji?" Ao Wushuang nodded. "Yes, this is your eldest Shiji Emoashi." Su Chan exclaimed, "Eldest Shiji looks like a bodhisattva." There was a rare hint of admiration in Ao Wushuang's eyes. She said, "Eldest Shiji also cultivates Vajra Buddhism, so she looks solemn and has the bearing of a bodhisattva." Although Emoashi's appearance was no different from that of a young woman in her 20s, her bearing made people feel that she was like an immovable bodhisattva in the world. As soon as she appeared, everyone present bowed to her in unison. After a while, several beautiful women in various costumes flew over. Ao Wushuang said in a low voice, "This is your third Sherbua Zhuang Yiting, fourth Sherbua Zhang Sun Hong, fifth Sherbua Lu Yue Hong, and sixth Sherbua Chao Yi." Su Chan looked at them one by one and finally, her eyes fell on Emoashi. Emoashi looked at Su Chan with a kind smile on her face, and then said to Ao Wushuang, "Little Shiji, you're back." If there was anyone in the Fox Zen school who could make Ao Wushuang feel some respect, it would be eldest Shiji Emoashi, except for Lu Yi, the head of the school. She raised one hand and nodded slightly, which could be regarded as a greeting. "Eldest Shiji, how have you been?" Emoashi smiled and said, "I'm fine. It's good that you're back." As she said this, she turned to look at Yi Yu and said softly, "Shiji, when the school is in danger, can't we talk about it later? Aren't you making your friends suffer and your enemies happy?" Yi Yu glanced at Ao Wushuang with a sneer. "Is she also a relative? Why are you talking about me and not her?" Although she refused to admit defeat, she waved her hand and took back the chakram. After that, she ignored the others and turned to leave. Ao Wushuang didn't wave her hand. In an instant, the countless Bahuang swords turned into one, and then flew behind Ao Wushuang in the blink of an eye, as if they had never appeared. Emoashi glanced at Ao Wushuang and said with a smile, "I haven't seen you for 10 years. Little Shiji's cultivation has improved again." Ao Wushuang smiled faintly. "Not at all. I'm just standing still. But eldest Shiji's cultivation has increased a lot." Emoashi sighed softly and said, "I'm sorry to make you laugh." After that, she said to the people around her, "Let's go." Then she nodded to Ao Wushuang and Su Chan and said, "Come with me." Su Chan followed Ao Wushuang and Emoashi into the Taoist temple. When they walked to an antique sandalwood door, Emoashi said to the two of them, "The leader is waiting for you inside. You can go in by yourself. Go to the net." After that, she smiled at Su Chan and Ao Wushuang and left gracefully. Su Chan followed closely behind Ao Wushuang and entered the room. She saw Lu Yi, the leader of the school, sitting on a futon and smoking a water pipe. Lu Yi was not surprised to see the two of them come in. He pointed at the stool with the cigarette butt and said, "You're here? Sit down." Ao Wushuang said coldly, "Leader, what's wrong with the outer disciples of our Fox Zen school? Why are their qualities so low?" Lu Yi smiled and said, "You don't know how expensive it is if you're not in charge. Besides, although I'm the leader in name, in fact, it's your eldest Shiji Emoashi who's in charge. If you have anything to say, go to her." Ao Wushuang snorted. She sat for a while with a cold face and asked, "Where is my room?" Lu Yi pointed in a direction with the cigarette butt and said, "It's 20 meters away from here." Ao Wushuang immediately got up as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. Su Chan was looking around curiously. Seeing her master get up and leave, she followed. When Ao Wushuang came to the room, she took a casual look and said, "Which one do you live in?" Su Chan rolled her eyes and said, "I live in the inner one." Ao Wushuang nodded. Her temper was sometimes cold and sometimes hot. She pulled over a futon and began to meditate and practice qi, regardless of whether Su Chan was idle or not. After staring at Ao Wushuang for a while, Su Chan sat at the square table in boredom and held her chin with her elbow. She muttered to herself, "I thought that when I and my master came back to help the sect through the difficulties, we would be welcomed like heroes, but I didn't expect it to be like this. What a disappointment." Su Chan couldn't help but look around the room. She found a simple mahogany bed, a simple square table, a few mahogany stools and a few rush cushions on the floor. Apart from that, there was nothing else in the room. Su Chan couldn't help complaining in her heart, "It's so boring. There's no soap opera to watch, no computer to surf the internet, and no delicious food. If only Yundong were here." Thinking of Yundong, the little girl couldn't help but miss him. For a moment, her mind began to wander, and she couldn't help glancing at her master. She rolled her eyes and said, "Master, I'll go to the sect and have a look around." Ao Wushuang snorted coldly. "You can go if you're not afraid of being bullied by others." Su Chan giggled and said, "I have my master to support me. I'm not afraid." Although Ao Wushuang didn't open her eyes, there was a smile at the corner of her mouth. She scolded with a smile, "You're glib. Go ahead. Don't be naughty." Su Chan said coquettishly, "Master, I'm not young anymore." After that, she skipped out of the door. After going out, Su Chan ran straight to the room of Lu Yi, the leader of the sect. She ran to the door, but for a moment she didn't dare to go in. She just poked her head out of the door and looked at Lu Yi, who was smoking a hookah. At first, Lu Yi deliberately pretended not to see Su Chan, but later, when he saw that Su Chan was really pitiful, he couldn't help laughing. "Well, little girl, don't hide there. What do you want from me? You must not have come to the temple for nothing." Su Chan giggled, jumped in front of Lu Yi, the leader of the sect, and said coquettishly, "Grandmaster, the paper crane I saw you with last time was very fun. Can you give me one to play with?" Lu Yi knocked on the hookah and said with a smile, "How did you know that the paper crane was mine?" Su Chan rolled her eyes and said slyly, "I didn't know at first, but now I know." "You devil." Lu Yi chuckled and spread out his palm. A paper crane the size of a fist flew towards Su Chan. Su Chan was overjoyed and immediately grabbed it in her hand. She was overjoyed and said, "Does it mean that it can go wherever I tell it to go?" Lu Yi glanced at Su Chan and said, "Yes, it's the same as when you use a magical item." Su Chan held the paper crane as if it was a treasure, as if she was afraid that sect leader Lu Yi would go back again. She turned around and ran out. After running out, she turned around and said with a smile, "Sect leader Grandmaster, thank you. You are a good person." Lu Yi chuckled and watched Su Chan's figure disappear at the door, revealing a meaningful smile. Su Chan returned to her room with the paper crane in her hand. When she passed by her master's room, she was careful and did not dare to breathe too much, as if she was afraid of waking up her master. It was not until she returned to her room that she closed the door tightly and let go of the paper crane on the table. As soon as she let go, the paper crane flew out with a whoosh. It twisted its neck and flapped its wings, as if it was uncomfortable being held by Su Chan just now. Su Chan found a pen and moved closer to the paper crane with a smile. She whispered, "Little sweetheart, don't move. I'll write a few words on your body. Help me pass a message to Yundong." Seeing that Su Chan was about to write on its body with a pen, the paper crane immediately spread its wings and was about to escape. Su Chan was quick and grabbed it. "You want to run? No way." The paper crane was caught by Su Chan. Seeing that the tip of the pen was getting closer and closer, it couldn't help struggling. Su Chan saw that it was struggling so hard that she couldn't write, so she couldn't help saying, "Don't move. Just write a few strokes." After that, she suddenly had an idea and said, "Ah, I know. You can't write on your body, right?" The paper crane seemed to understand her words and actually nodded its head. Su Chan giggled. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" She thought for a moment, found a piece of paper, wrote a sentence on it, and then put it in the body of the paper crane. She tapped the head of the paper crane with her finger and said, "Hey, you don't want me to write on your body, so I put a note on it. If you lose it for me, hum." After that, Su Chan made a very fierce gesture of tearing the paper. The paper crane was so scared that it shrank its head. Su Chan said, "Alas, my phone was also confiscated by my master. Otherwise, I wouldn't have looked for an unreliable guy like you. Forget it, now fly to Yundong's side for me. Remember, don't lose the note." After she finished speaking, Jiha looked around with a blank look on her face. Su Chan couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, why are you in a daze? Hurry up." The paper crane raised its head to look at Su Chan and shook its head vigorously. Su Chan said angrily, "Why don't you want to go?" Then she grabbed it with both hands, wanting to ravage it. The paper crane was so scared that it struggled hard again. Su Chan saw that it was struggling so hard that the note fell off. She couldn't help but say angrily, "Hey, do you have to be so scared?" As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly thought, "Oh right, I haven't told it where to go yet." Su Chan patted her forehead. "I'm so stupid." After that, she leaned over to the paper crane and told it the address. Then she affectionately patted its head and said, "Now you know where it is? Hurry up." The paper crane was afraid of being tossed around by Su Chan, so it quickly spread its wings and flew away. With a whoosh, it disappeared out of the window. Su Chan looked in the direction where the paper crane had gone and couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. "I wonder how Yundong will react when he sees my note. Will he miss me? What will he write back to me?" Just as the little girl was thinking about the sweetness, she couldn't help but reveal a knowing smile on her face. However, when she gradually retracted her infatuated gaze, she swept her gaze across the table and suddenly saw a note with words written on it lying alone on the table. Su Chan's eyes suddenly went blank. She wanted to shout, but she was afraid that her master would hear her, so she couldn't help but gnash her teeth and whisper to the window, "Hey idiot, you didn't bring the note. Come back. /om/." Chapter 215. Go to watch net. But the paper crane had already flown far away. How could Su Chan call it back? The little girl was so depressed that she wanted to fly out and chase the paper crane back. But as soon as this idea came to her mind, she heard Ao Wushuang say from the next room, "Chaner, what did you just say?" Su Chan immediately replied embarrassedly, "No, nothing, master." After that, she sat down on her bed gloomily, hugged her knees with her hands and rested her chin on them. She couldn't help complaining to herself, Su Chan, you are so stupid. It's not easy for you to get a paper crane. Now it's all over. When Yundong gets it, how will he know that I gave it to him?" But after thinking about this, she couldn't help comforting herself. Well, maybe Yundong will understand when he sees it. He should have this tacit understanding with me. While she was thinking about this with resentment, Li Yundong had just returned from class in Tianan City with the psychic fan of 7 treasures on his back. Go to watch net. The latest movies, TV series and variety shows were all there. As his cultivation deepened, Li Yundong gradually understood the meaning and true meaning of cultivation. Gradually, he began to no longer rely on the car as a means of transportation, but more on his own legs. Whether it was going to school or getting off school, he would run back with his legs carrying the psychic fan of 7 treasures, which weighed more than 50 kilograms. Along the way, he paid attention to adjusting the qi in his body. Could be said that he was cultivating all the time. When he returned home, he opened the door with the key. As soon as he entered the door, he smelled a fragrance. Li Yundong looked around curiously and saw 2 dishes on the table. Li Yundong took a look and saw that the first dish was a vegetable platter stir-fried with celery, lilies, corn kernels and asparagus. There was no oil in it, and a thin layer of starch juice was poured over it, making it look crystal clear. In addition, these dishes were arranged in a beautiful fan shape. The colors of each dish were clearly layered, making it look beautiful and delicious. It was impossible for a chef to make such a dish. Li Yundong laughed. He didn't even need to look to know that it must have been Ziyuan who had cooked the dishes. He shouted in the dining room, "Hey, is it a holiday today? The eldest senior sister of the Linggong sect of the Jingyi school is cooking in person?" After a while, Ziyuan came out of the kitchen wearing an apron, holding a soup bowl in her hand. Li Yundong glanced at it and saw that it was a bowl of white fish soup. From a few meters away, Li Yundong could smell the strong aroma of fish, which made him want to eat it. Li Yundong chuckled and said, "So rich? What happened? Why is it so grand?" Ziyuan smiled slightly and said, "You have just begun to practice your magical powers, so you shouldn't focus your attention on trivial matters. Moreover, the divine tribulation will come at any time. You should concentrate all your time on cultivation. Watch net. So, I'll help you with these trivial matters." Li Yundong put away his school bag and the fan of 7 treasures, washed his hands and walked over to the dining table. Do I have to pay you? Ziyuan took off the apron in front of her and said with a smile, Can you afford it? Li Yundong laughed and said, How can I afford to hire a fairy like you as a nanny? If I do that, my life will be shortened. As he spoke, he pulled Ziyuan's seat away. After she was seated, he went to serve the rice himself and said, Come on, sit down. I'll go get the rice. If I let a fairy like you go in and out of the kitchen and let others see you, they will say that I don't know how to show mercy to women. Ziyuan looked at his figure bending over to serve the rice, and a gentle smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Are you always so glib to girls? She asked. Li Yundong filled the bowl with rice and placed it in front of Ziyuan. He cried out in grievance, How can I do that? I'm just talking about the matter as it stands. You think too much. Ziyuan looked at Li Yundong, her eyes fixed and a little complicated. After a while, she sighed in her heart. There is nothing wrong with the world and people are just making trouble for themselves. Li Yundong, you should know that all people in this world are actually mediocre. Sometimes they don't know how to tell whether you are heartless or affectionate. But she didn't say this out loud. She just lowered her head and ate her food silently. Ziyuan was a person who paid great attention to rules. She didn't talk when she was eating and she didn't talk when she was sleeping. According to Li Yundong's observation, even every step she took seemed to be the same size, as if she had deliberately measured it with a ruler. Except for a few times when she lost control of her emotions and had some normal reactions, most of the time she looked like a fairy who had descended to the world. Li Yundong chewed and swallowed slowly. He was about to get up to clean up when he heard a knocking sound coming from the window connecting the living room and the balcony. Li Yundong walked over curiously and saw a paper crane beating the French window with its wings as if it were alive. What's going on? Li Yundong opened the door curiously. As soon as the door opened, the paper crane flew into his palm. The paper crane shook its body as if it was trying to shake something out, but after shaking for a while there was no movement. It turned its head to look at its body and suddenly, its whole body trembled. Then its whole body began to tremble. Li Yundong looked at the paper crane, which seemed to be psychic, and suddenly found it interesting. He asked curiously, Where did you come from? The paper crane raised its head and looked at him. It was in a daze for a while, then pointed out the window with its wings. Go to see. Li Yundong asked curiously, Someone sent you here? The paper crane nodded quickly. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat and he suddenly asked, Did Chick send you here? The paper crane didn't know who Chick was. It was at a loss for a while, staying in Li Yundong's palm, not knowing how to react. Li Yundong smiled very confidently. Yes, you must have been sent here by Chick. Wait here, I'll write a note. As he said this, he went into the room and wrote a note. Then he put it in the body of the paper crane and said, Go, take this back with you. This time the paper crane carefully looked behind it. After making sure that the note was still there, it spread its wings and flew away with a whoosh. Su-chan was waiting anxiously in the room. While she was pacing around, she suddenly saw a white shadow flash by. The paper crane flew back. Su-chan immediately rushed over and grabbed it. She gritted her teeth and said, You idiot. You bastard. You ran away without a note. Do you want to piss me off? The poor paper crane was almost out of shape by Su-chan. It struggled hard, its head shaking and kept pointing at its back with its wings. Su-chan glanced at it and was surprised to find that there was a note in it. She let go of the paper crane and opened the note. It was Li Yundong's familiar handwriting. Chick, is that you? Su-chan was so happy that her chest almost exploded. She subconsciously wanted to let out an excited scream, but as soon as the sound reached her throat, it was abruptly stopped. She covered her mouth with her palm as if trying to stop the sound from coming out. After a while, the girl nervously glanced through the crack of the door at her master outside. Seeing that she was still quietly meditating, she was relieved. Su-chan's eyes turned into crescent moons. She held the note with both hands as if it was the most precious treasure in the world. She was full of joy and thought, Yundong is Yundong. He guessed it was me. She giggled at the note for a while, then suddenly remembered something. Oh, I was too happy and forgot to reply. She quickly rushed to the table, picked up a pen and wrote a note. Then she stuffed the note into the body of the paper crane and whispered kindly, Good girl, I misunderstood you just now. I'm sorry. The poor paper crane was trying to smooth out the wrinkles on its body caused by Su-chan's pinching with its mouth and wings. It raised its head as if it was too angry to ignore Su-chan and proposed to go on strike. Su Chan suddenly said angrily, "If you don't fly over quickly, I'll tear you apart." The paper crane was shocked. It looked at Su Chan with its head shrunk and finally flew out helplessly. The speed of the paper crane was extremely fast. Li Yundong only felt that he had waited for about half an hour before the paper crane flew back. Li Yundong was overjoyed. He held the paper crane, took out the note and glanced at it. It was indeed a letter from Su Chan. He suppressed his ecstasy and read it word by word. "Master, you are so smart. You know it's a chick at a glance. I forgot to put a note in it just now. You won't blame me for being stupid, will you? By the way, I'm going back to the sect with my master now. You don't have to worry about me. How about you? How are you?" Li Yundong smiled and wrote a few lines on the back of the note, then clipped it to the back of the paper crane and told it to take it back. Li Yundong watched as the paper crane flapped its wings and flew away. He felt that in this era of the explosion of the internet, it was quite interesting for him and Su Chan to send a letter from thousands of miles away. When Su Chan received the paper crane, she couldn't wait to take out the note. It read, "Of course. I told you that our hearts are connected. Your master has already succeeded in the Zhuji phase. Once I pass the heavenly tribulation, I'll come and pick you up. From then on, you can travel the world and laugh at the Jianghu." Su Chan read the note over and over again. She was so happy that she felt like her heart was about to explode. After a while, she picked up the pen and wrote a few lines on the note, but she felt unsatisfied, so she crushed it and threw it aside. She picked up the pen again and wrote a few more lines. She looked at it again and again but still felt unsatisfied, so she threw it away. She repeated this a few times and the room was filled with paper scraps. Finally, Su Chan smiled mischievously and wrote over and over again, "Master, if you continue my next sentence, I'll believe that our hearts are connected." At this point, Su Chan wanted to write the first half of a poem, but just as she was about to start writing, she suddenly thought, "What if I can't continue this poem? What should I do? Won't I be making a fool of myself?" She thought about it for a long time and finally her eyes lit up. She tore the note and wrote a line on a new one. After Li Yundong received the letter by flying crane, he opened the note and saw a line of affectionate words written on it. If the love between two people lasts for a long time, logically speaking, there should be another sentence below. Li Yundong knew that this was Qin Guan's famous sentence throughout the ages, but the following sentence was written on the note. Li Yundong understood and smiled. He was about to write, but his heart skipped a beat. He immediately smiled evilly and wrote a line of words. By the time the poor paper crane flew back, it was already dark. As soon as it got into Su Chan's room, it lay on the table and refused to get up again. Su Chan ignored it and rushed to open the note first. As soon as she opened the note and glanced at it, she suddenly burst into laughter. She saw that the note said, "If the love between two people lasts for a long time, why would they sleep on the same bed?" Su Chan smiled so hard that her eyes narrowed into a line. She whispered, "Master, master, you're still thinking of playing tricks on me from so far away?" Looking at the note, the little lass giggled for a moment, and then fell into a daze with a sweet expression on her face. Her soft little heart had long been filled with something called happiness and sweetness. It was as if secretly passing a few notes to the person she loved from thousands of miles away was already the greatest happiness in the world. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.